Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto inherited the quirk all for one and fell in love with Star and Stripe? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Ghost of Musudafu. The rain fell on Musudafu in slick, oily sheets, plastering neon advertisements to the sides of skyscrapers and turning the streets into fractured mirrors of light and shadow. It was the kind of night that swallowed sound, where the city's endless hum was muted to a low thrum, a predator's purr. In a forgotten alley, smelling of ozone and wet garbage, a man named Kento was learning the true meaning of silence. He was pinned to the rain-slicked brick, an invisible force crushing the air from his lungs. His quirk, a minor but useful ability to generate kinetic bubbles that could knock a man off his feet, was fizzling in his palms like cheap champagne. He tried to summon one, to push away the figure that stood before him, but the power felt distant, like a memory from someone else's life. The figure was tall, lean, and cloaked in the alley's oppressive darkness. The only features Kento could discern were a shock of blonde hair, stark against the gloom, and eyes that seemed to burn with a cold, blue fire. There was no theatrical costume, no heroic declaration. Just a simple black jacket and a presence that felt older and heavier than the city itself. "Please," Kento rasped, the word tearing at his throat. His two associates were already down, slumped in impossible angles against a dumpster, their eyes vacant. They weren't dead. They were just empty. He had seen the figure touch them, a brief, almost gentle contact at the temple, and then the light in their eyes had gone out. Their quirks, a crude metal morphing and a weak pyrokinesis, had vanished with it. The blond man tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity that was far more terrifying than any threat. "Please what?" His voice was calm, level, with a strange, almost foreign cadence. It held no malice, only a profound and unnerving finality. "You were threatening to bring this building down. You were hurting people. I stopped you. We'll leave. We'll never come back, I swear." Kento babbled, desperation clawing at him. He could feel it now, a horrifying sensation like a hook sinking into his very soul, a gentle but insistent tugging originating from the man before him. "I know," the figure said. He took a step forward, the movement unnervingly fluid. He raised a hand, his palm open. "You'll leave your ability to cause this kind of trouble behind. Think of it as a severance package." Kento screamed, a thin, wet sound that the rain immediately devoured. The man's hand rested on his forehead. It wasn't cold, it wasn't hot. It felt like nothing. But inside his mind, the hook pulled taut. There was a sickening lurch. A feeling of profound, intimate violation, as if a vital part of himself was being neatly excised, drawn out through the point of contact. He saw a flash of swirling energy. A chaotic storm of light and color that was his birthright, his power, his very identity. And then he saw it flow, a tamed river, into the man who was taking it. The pressure on his chest vanished. Kento slid down the wall, landing in a heap on the wet asphalt. He was weak, trembling, but that wasn't the worst of it. He reached inside himself for the familiar warmth of his quirk and found only a cold, hollow void. It was gone, not suppressed, not blocked. Gone. The part of him that made him special had been scooped out, leaving a wound no doctor could ever heal. The blond man stood over him, flexing his fingers. A small, perfect sphere of pure kinetic force, shimmering and translucent, popped into existence above his palm. It was Kento's quirk, wielded with a casual mastery that Kento himself had never achieved. The man studied it for a moment, then closed his hand, and the bubble vanished. He had catalogued it, stored it, made it his own. "A useful trick," the man murmured, more to himself than to the broken shell of a man at his feet. He turned and began to walk away, his footsteps silent against the pavement. He was just another shadow swallowed by the rain. Kento could only stare, his mind struggling to process the impossible. The stories on the underworld forums were true. The whispers of a ghost that haunted the city's dark corners, a predator that hunted not for money or fame, but for power itself. A demon that didn't kill you, but left you as a ghost in your own life. They called him the Collector. Naruto Uzumaki stood on the roof of a nondescript apartment building, letting the rain wash over him. He felt the echo of the kinetic bubbles, the simple, elegant physics of it, settling into the vast, internal library of abilities he now possessed. It was a minor addition, a footnote in a collection that had grown immense, but every piece had its potential, its place in the complex mosaic of his power. All for one. The name was a whisper from a past he couldn't quite grasp. A half-remembered dream of a terrifying man in a black suit and a life support mask. The power, however, was intimately, frighteningly real. When he had woken up in this strange new world, a teenager again but with the memories of a life of war and loss scarring his soul, the ability had woken with him. It was a hunger, a gnawing emptiness that only the taste of a new quirk could momentarily soothe. He lived in the city's cracks. His apartment was a small, Spartan room in a forgotten district, paid for with cash taken from the very villains he stripped of their power. He owned little. A bed, a table, a laptop he used to monitor the pulse of the world. He had no friends, no family, no connections. He was a ghost, and it was safer that way. To connect with someone was to give them a weakness he couldn't afford and to expose them to a danger they couldn't possibly comprehend. This world was obsessed with power, with quirks. They celebrated it, legislated it, built their entire society around it. Heroes and villains, a garish, never-ending stage play. Yet, they were like children playing with matches. They had no idea what true power was. They had no idea of the scale of the universe, of the things that lurked in the darkness between stars. He remembered pale, horned figures who devoured worlds and treated planets as mere nurseries for their divine trees. The thought sent a cold dread through him, a feeling deeper and more primal than anything this world could conjure. He had spent years now, simply observing, learning, accumulating. His collection of quirks was a toolbox, a palette of colors with which he could paint any reality he chose. A minor regeneration quirk, stolen from a street-level thug, kept him in peak physical condition. A sensory enhancement, taken from a disgraced hero in training, allowed him to feel the vibrations of the city, to hear whispers from a dozen blocks away. He had quirks for movement, for defense, for information gathering, and for raw, overwhelming destruction. He didn't see himself as a hero or a villain. Those were childish labels. He was a survivor. He was a predator in a world of peacocks, and his sole purpose was to accumulate enough power to ensure that he would never be helpless again. Never again would he be at the mercy of a rampaging tailed beast, a manipulative village council, or a godlike being from another dimension. Here, with all for one, he could become the apex. He could become the thing that even gods would fear. His enhanced senses picked up a shift in the city's rhythm. A surge of sirens, a tremor of panic in the chatter of police radios. It was bigger than a simple smash and grab. He moved to the edge of the rooftop, his eyes scanning the glowing metropolis. On a massive screen attached to the side of the Kino Tower, the usual loop of commercials was replaced by a breaking news report. The camera was shaky, focused on the entrance to the Musudafu Central Bank. The building's facade was blown out, smoke and debris spilling onto the street. A group of villains, heavily armed and broadcasting their demands, had taken hostages. Their leader, a brutish man with rocky, gray skin, called himself Tremor. The news anchor's voice was strained, reporting that Tremor's quirk allowed him to generate seismic waves, and he was threatening to level the entire city block if his demands for a ridiculous sum of money and a clear escape route weren't met. Naruto watched, his expression unreadable. This was a disruption, a loud, messy, and predictable one. The local heroes would arrive, postured and preened, and a destructive fight would ensue. Infrastructure would be damaged, people would be terrified, and the status quo would be violently reasserted. It was inefficient, annoying. It drew attention to this part of the city, his part of the city. And for that reason, it had to be dealt with. He wasn't interested in the hostages. He wasn't interested in justice. He was interested in silence, in maintaining his anonymity. And Tremor, with his city block leveling threats, was a screaming infant in a library. As he prepared to move, the news broadcast suddenly switched to a different feed. The tone of the anchorwoman shifted from panic to reverent. The screen showed a runway at Tokyo International Airport. A formidable-looking, futuristic jet, painted in the bold red, white, and blue of the American flag, had just touched down. "We are getting confirmation now," the anchorwoman said, her voice filled with awe, that the American #1 hero, Star and Stripe, has arrived in Japan for the annual Hero Diplomacy Summit. The jet's ramp lowered. For a moment, there was only the expectant hush of the gathered press. Then, she appeared. Naruto froze. She was a titan, a woman sculpted from conviction and power. Her uniform was a striking tribute to her nation's flag, her hair a cascade of white and blue. But it wasn't her appearance that held him captive. It was her presence. Even through the filter of a television screen dozens of miles away, he could feel it. It was an aura of such staggering, absolute power that it felt like a physical weight. A shift in the very fabric of reality. It was a power that wasn't hungry or grasping, like his own. It was settled, confident, an immovable object and an unstoppable force all at once. It was the calm, breathtaking certainty of a star, burning with its own inexhaustible fuel. Her name was Kathleen Bate. He knew of her, of course. He had studied the world's most powerful individuals. But data was one thing. This was another. He, who could perceive and understand the very essence of a person's power, saw in her a universe of it. An ability so profound, so conceptually terrifying, that it dwarfed almost everything he had ever encountered. She smiled at the cameras, a bright, confident expression that promised safety and exuded charisma. She spoke, her voice clear and strong, about cooperation and peace. But Naruto wasn't listening to the words. He was watching the way the air itself seemed to defer to her, the way light bent around her. For the first time since he had arrived in this world, he felt the thrill of the unknown. He had found something worthy of his attention. The screen cut back to the bank heist, but the image of the woman remained burned into his mind. The screaming infant in the library was still screaming. He would deal with it. But now, his objective had a new dimension. He wasn't just restoring his peace and quiet. He was clearing the board. Because something told him, with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones, that he was going to meet this Star and Stripe. And when he did, he didn't want any petty distractions cluttering the air between them. The inside of the bank was a tableau of controlled chaos. Tremor stood in the center of the grand lobby, his rocky fists clenched, enjoying the palpable fear of the 24 hostages huddled against the far wall. His crew, the brute squad as he unironically called them, were second-rate villains with third-rate quirks, but their numbers and his power made them a credible threat. The heroes are here, one of them, a lanky man who could stretch his limbs like taffy, reported from a shattered window. Looks like Death Arms and Kamui Woods are taking point. Tremor grinned, a jagged expression on his stone-like face. Perfect. Let him posture. The moment they try to breach, I bring the roof down on these civvies. They know the rules. He slammed his fist into the marble floor, not with full force, but enough to send a sharp, rattling tremor through the building. The hostages cried out, and the message was sent. He was in control. The lights flickered, once, twice, then they went out, plunging the lobby into near total darkness, pierced only by the distant, flashing red and blue of emergency vehicles. What was that? Tremor growled. Power surge. No, another of his men. A woman who could generate blinding flashes of light, said. Her voice was tight with sudden nerves. That felt intentional, like a circuit was cleanly severed. She tried to activate her quirk, to flood the room with light. But only a pathetic little spark sputtered from her palms. I can't. A cold dread began to seep into the room. The stretching man suddenly yelped, his elongated arm retracting with a wet, snapping sound as if it were a rubber band that had lost all its elasticity. My quirk, it's gone. Panic erupted among the villains. One by one, they reached for their powers and found nothing. The familiar inner fire was extinguished, leaving them suddenly, terrifyingly normal. Tremor felt a surge of rage mixed with fear. Who's there? Show yourself. He roared into the darkness. A voice, calm and detached, echoed from the vaulted ceiling above. You wanted the heroes. You got me instead. A figure dropped from the shadows, landing in a silent crouch in the center of the lobby. He rose to his full height, the faint emergency lights from outside tracing his silhouette. The hostages held their breath. This wasn't a hero. There was no bright costume, no reassuring smile. There was only a quiet, predatory intensity that made the air grow thick and cold. You, Tremor snarled, recognizing him from the vague, fearful descriptions of the underworld. The collector. I'm flattered, Naruto said, his voice laced with an almost bored irony. But I'm not here to collect, not really. I'm here to quiet things down. Tremor, despite the fear coiling in his gut, was still the most powerful man in the room. His quirk wasn't some flashy parlor trick, it was raw, geological force. You think you can take my power? I'm the earth itself. He stomped his foot, and a wave of seismic energy erupted from him, tearing up the marble floor and racing towards Naruto. It was a shockwave that could turn bone to powder. Naruto didn't move, he simply raised a hand, and a shimmering, translucent wall of force materialized in front of him. It wasn't Kento's weak kinetic bubble. This was something else entirely, a quirk taken from a C-list hero who had tried to apprehend him months ago. A barrier of solidified air pressure. The seismic wave crashed against it and dissipated into harmless vibrations. Tremor stared in disbelief. Predictable, Naruto stated. He vanished. Not with speed, but by folding space. A short-range teleportation quirk he'd taken from a getaway driver. He reappeared directly behind Tremor. Before the brute could even react, Naruto's hand was on his neck. Tremor felt the hook sink in. But this time it was different. It wasn't a gentle pull, it was a violent, ravenous rip. His connection to the earth, the tectonic power that was his entire identity, was being torn from him with savage force. He roared, a sound of agony and violation, as a lifetime of power was siphoned out of him in a matter of seconds. He collapsed, no longer a man of living stone, but just a man. His skin softened, the rocky texture receding to reveal pale, terrified flesh. He was powerless, naked. Naruto stood over him, feeling the raw, untamed power of the seismic quirk settling within him. It was a potent one. Crude, but potent. He could feel the lines of tectonic stress running deep beneath the city, a new sense he hadn't possessed moments before. He could level this entire block with a thought. He wouldn't, of course. That would be loud. He turned his attention to the remaining, quirkless villains, who were now frozen in pure terror. He moved among them like a phantom. A light touched to each of their foreheads. He wasn't taking anything. They had nothing left to take. He was using a mild neurological quirk, something to induce a short, dreamless sleep. One by one, they crumpled to the floor. The entire confrontation had lasted less than a minute. He looked over at the hostages, who were staring at him with a mixture of terror and awe. He ignored them. He walked to the broken entrance of the bank and looked out at the cordon of police and heroes. They were still planning their assault, completely unaware that the threat had been neutralized. From his vantage point, he could see the Kaino Tower. The news was still covering the arrival of Star and Stripe. She was shaking hands with a Japanese diplomat, her smile as bright and unwavering as the sun. Strange feeling stirred in Naruto's chest. It wasn't the hunger of all for one. It was something else. A flicker of warmth. A spark of genuine curiosity. A desire, for the first time in a very long time, not to take, but to know. He pulled another quirk from his collection, an ability that manipulated light particles to create a localized field of invisibility. He stepped out of the bank, unseen, and melted into the city's shadows, leaving behind a scene of impossible silence. He left behind a group of broken villains, a room full of bewildered hostages, and a mystery that would send ripples of fear and confusion through both the hero and villain communities for weeks to come. He left behind the growing legend of the ghost of Musudafu. But as he moved through the rain-swept streets, his mind was no longer on the quirks he had taken. It was on the woman who felt like a star. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. An Unlikely Alliance. The meeting room was designed to be suffocating. It was a sterile, windowless box deep within the headquarters of the Hero Public Safety Commission, furnished with a single, brutally long table of polished black granite. The air was chilled to a precise temperature that discouraged comfort, and the only light came from a recessed fixture that cast everyone's face in sharp, unforgiving angles. It was a place for commands to be given, not for conversations to be had. Kathleen Bates sat at one end of the table, a vibrant splash of red, white, and blue against the monochrome austerity. She had been in rooms like this her entire career, from military command centers to White House briefings. She knew the language of power that was spoken in silence, the calculated placement of a water glass, the deliberate angle of a chair. The HPSC were fluent. Across from her sat the Commission's president. A woman whose name was a matter of public record but whose presence was that of a carefully curated specter. Her face was a mask of serene professionalism, her smile never quite reaching the shrewd, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She slid a tablet across the granite. The motion was unnervingly silent. The Musutafu Central Bank incident, the president began. Her voice as smooth and cool as the table between them. As you can see from the initial reports, all 16 hostages were unharmed. The perpetrators were apprehended. By all metrics, a successful resolution. Kathleen swiped through the file. She saw the images of the unconscious villains, the bewildered but safe civilians. She also saw the preliminary analysis of the perpetrators. It says here their quirks were gone. A precise and accurate assessment, the president affirmed, folding her hands. This is the work of an individual codenamed Collector. For the past 18 months, he has been responsible for over 40 documented cases of permanent quirk erasure. His targets are exclusively villains, but his methods are unsanctioned, and his existence represents a fundamental threat to social order. A man who can steal the very core of a person's identity is a weapon of unimaginable potential. Kathleen looked up from the tablet, her gaze steady. You brought me to Japan for a diplomatic summit, Madam President. This sounds like an internal security matter. The president's smile tightened by a millimeter. Ordinarily, yes. However, the collector's latest acquisition was the quirk of the villain, Tremor. An ability with the potential for citywide destruction. This entity, whoever he is escalating. He is no longer just removing disruptive elements, he is actively acquiring strategic-level power. That makes him an international concern. A man with an arsenal of unknown abilities, operating with no oversight, is a threat to everyone. It was a masterful piece of political maneuvering. They were framing Naruto not as a vigilante, but as a rogue state, a walking WMD. They were appealing to her sense of global responsibility, using her own dedication to order as a lever. And what do you want from me? Kathleen asked, though she already knew the answer. Your presence in Japan is a unique opportunity. He operates in the shadows, and our own heroes have been unable to track him. He is a ghost. But you, the president leaned forward, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur, you are the strongest woman in the world. Your power is a beacon. We believe that if anyone can draw him out, it is you. We are formally requesting your assistance, as a gesture of goodwill between our nations, to help us investigate and neutralize this threat. Kathleen looked at the smiling president, at the silent, imposing figures of her aides lining the wall. She could feel the weight of their expectations, the carefully constructed box they were trying to put her in. They were feeding her a clean, simple narrative. Find the monster, stop the monster. But Kathleen had hunted monsters before. They were never this simple. I'll need access to all of your intelligence. Unredacted, she stated. It was a test. Of course, the president agreed, a little too quickly. Our resources are at your disposal. We are all on the same side, after all. Kathleen felt a faint, cold prickle of doubt. In her experience, anyone who had to say that rarely ever was. Naruto sat cross-legged on the floor of his bare-bones apartment, his eyes closed. He was not meditating. He was exploring. The seismic quirk he had taken from Tremor was a chaotic, beautiful thing. It was more than just brute force, it was an intimate connection to the planet's circulatory system. He could feel the low thrum of the subway lines miles away, the deep, slow grinding of the tectonic plates, the faint, almost imperceptible stress fractures in the foundations of the buildings around him. He could map the city not by sight, but by its deep, geological heartbeat. It was in this state of heightened awareness that he felt the watchers. They weren't physical presences. It was more subtle, a series of interconnected sensory quirks. Faint but persistent, painting a net across his district. One perceived shifts in air pressure. Another tasted chemical signatures in the atmosphere. A third analyzed sound waves, filtering for specific patterns. It was the HPSC, no doubt. Clumsy, but comprehensive. They were hunting him like a wild animal, trying to triangulate his lair. They would fail. His own sensory abilities, a layered composite of a dozen stolen quirks, allowed him to perceive their net as if it were a glowing spiderweb. He could see every strand, every anchor point. Then he felt something else. It was a sun rising in the east when the sky was already bright. A sudden, overwhelming spike of power that dwarfed the city's entire energy output. It was clean, pure, and so vast it was almost incomprehensible. It was a gravitational anomaly, a point of impossible density that warped the very reality around it. It was Star and Stripe. And she was moving. A cold, thrilling clarity washed over him. They were using her as bait. The HPSC had pointed their star-spangled cannon in his general direction and were hoping he would be foolish enough to show himself. They underestimated him. They thought he was a rat to be flushed out. He was the predator, and the board was his to set. He rose to his feet, a faint smile playing on his lips. This was better than he could have hoped for. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't hide. He would orchestrate their meeting. He would choose the time, the place, and the terms of their engagement. He pulled on his black jacket and melted out of the apartment, not through the door, but by stepping through a sliver of folded space that deposited him in an alleyway 3 blocks away, leaving the HPSC's sensory net to close on an empty room. He moved through the city like a whisper, a ghost in the machine. He chose his stage carefully. The rooftop of the Mori Sky Tower, the tallest building in the city, a needle of steel and glass that pierced the clouds. It was a place of prominence. A throne room overlooking the world. It was a statement. When Kathleen arrived, he was waiting. He sat on the edge of the rooftop, his legs dangling over the dizzying 1,000-foot drop. The wind whipping through his blonde hair. He seemed perfectly at ease, as if he were merely watching the sunset. Kathleen arrived not with the roar of a jetpack or a thunderous landing, but with a silent grace that defied the power she commanded. One moment, the rooftop was empty save for him. The next, she was there, standing 20 feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. Her presence was a physical force, pressing down on the air, making it feel thick and heavy. Lesser men would have found it difficult to breathe. Naruto simply savored it, like a connoisseur tasting a rare vintage. I have to admit, he said, his voice carrying easily over the wind, not turning to face her. Their tracking methods are getting better. They must have given you some impressive toys. No toys, Kathleen replied. Her voice as solid and uncompromising as granite. You leave a trail. Every quirk you take carries a unique energy signature. It's faint, but if you know what to look for, it's like following footprints in the snow. You have quite the collection. A collector's instinct, he said, finally turning to look at her. His eyes, a piercing and intelligent blue, met hers. There was no fear in them. No anger, only an unnerving, absolute self-possession. You must be Star and Stripe. It's a pleasure. I've heard impressive things. The HPSC has branded you a threat to international security. They call you the Collector, she stated, taking a step forward. Her posture was that of a soldier, perfectly balanced, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. They say you steal quirks, leaving people as empty shells. Naruto chuckled. A low, genuine sound. They have a flair for the dramatic. I don't steal. I repossess. I take dangerous weapons out of the hands of reckless children. Tell me, how many city blocks did Tremor threaten to level? And how much collateral damage would the ensuing hero battle have caused? I resolved the situation in under a minute. No property damage. No civilian casualties. The only things that were hurt were the egos of a few thugs and the bottom line of the local hero agencies. So tell me, who is the real threat to security? His logic was infuriatingly sound. He was reframing his actions not as villainy, but as a form of brutal, uncompromising efficiency. You are operating outside the law, Kathleen countered, her voice steely. Society is built on rules. Without them, there is only chaos. What you do creates fear and instability. Fear. Naruto stood up, walking toward her with a slow, deliberate pace. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. This society is already built on fear. Fear of the powerful. The government and its sanctioned heroes have a monopoly on power. And they tell you that's what keeps you safe. They tell you to fear the villain in the mask, but never the politician in the suit who sends heroes to fight his battles. I don't create fear. I simply remind people that power is not a toy, and that those who misuse it will have it taken away. He was subverting her entire worldview, picking at the very foundations of her heroic code. He wasn't a cackling villain. He was a philosopher with a terrifyingly practical application for his beliefs. "That's not your decision to make," she said, her voice tight. "Isn't it?" he challenged, his gaze intense. "When you stand on a battlefield, and you decide who lives and who dies, who is a threat and who is a civilian, are you following a rulebook, or are you making a decision? You and I are the same, Star and Stripe. We are individuals who have been blessed, or cursed, with the power to impose our will on reality. The only difference is that you have a flag pinned to your chest, and I do not." Kathleen felt her certainty wavering. He wasn't just talking, he was seeing her. He was looking past the uniform and the title and speaking to the soldier, to the woman who had made impossible choices in the name of the greater good. Before she could form a rebuttal, a faint hiss cut through the air. Naruto's head snapped to the side. Down. He moved with impossible speed. In the fracti on of a second it took for Kathleen's combat instincts to register the threat, he had closed the distance between them. An arm wrapped around her waist, and he pulled her down, twisting his body to shield hers. A volley of sleek, black darts, trailing a faint purple energy, zipped through the space where they had been standing, embedding themselves in the concrete wall of the rooftop access structure. All around them, figures rose from the shadows. 6 of them, heroes, judging by their costumes, but they moved with the silent, coordinated precision of Black Ops soldiers. These weren't the flashy heroes from the evening news. They were the HPSC's wetwork team. "So much for a clean investigation," Naruto murmured, his voice close to her ear. He released her and straightened up, his posture shifting from that of a debater to that of a predator. "They were using you as a lure after all. How does it feel to be a pawn, Commander?" Kathleen's eyes narrowed, her shock instantly replaced by a cold, simmering fury. The HPSC president's words echoed in her mind. "Our resources are at your disposal. We are all on the same side." They had lied. They had used her, putting her in the line of fire without her knowledge. The lead HPSC hero, a man in gray tactical gear with a visor covering his eyes, raised a hand. "Collector, surrender. You are surrounded. Star and Stripe, stand down. This is a commission matter." "It is now," Kathleen said, her voice dangerously low. But she didn't move to attack them. She watched Naruto. He didn't seem concerned. He simply sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. "This is just loud," he said. Then, he acted. He stomped his foot on the rooftop. Not with his own strength, but with the raw, geological power of Tremor's quirk. A controlled, violent tremor shook the building. Not enough to cause structural damage, but perfectly calibrated to throw the HPSC team off their balance. As they stumbled, Naruto raised a hand. The air around them shimmered and de-warped as he activated a localized gravity well quirk. The 6 heroes were slammed to the ground, pinned by a force 5 times that of normal gravity. They grunted, their bodies held immobile. One of them, a woman, managed to lift her head, firing a beam of concussive energy from her gauntlet. Before it could reach Naruto, he simply held up his open palm and a miniature vortex of swirling air, a quirk he'd taken from a petty thief, caught the beam and harmlessly dissipated it. It was all so effortless. He wasn't fighting them. He was dismissing them. He walked over to the pinned leader and casually plucked the specialized rifle from his hands. He examined it for a moment. "Quirk nullifying agent. Nasty stuff. Not very sporting of you." He crushed the rifle in his hand as if it were a soda can. He turned back to Kathleen, who had watched the entire one-sided confrontation without moving a muscle. The sheer, casual breadth of his power was staggering. He had used at least 4 different quirks in less than 10 seconds. Each one a perfect counter. "They see us both as pieces on their board," Naruto said, his voice calm again, the storm having passed as quickly as it arrived. "Me, a rogue piece to be removed. You, a queen to be sacrificed for a better position. You can go back to them, and they'll apologize and feed you another lie. Or you can work with me and find out what they re so desperate to hide that they'd risk your life to do it." He held out his hand. It wasn't a plea, it was an offer. A simple, clear choice. Kathleen looked from his outstretched hand to the pinned HPSC agents. Then back to his piercing blue eyes. Her world, once a clear map of right and wrong, of black and white, had become a chaotic landscape of gray. The HPSC was corrupt. This man, this collector, was a lawbreaker. A thief on a grand scale. But he hadn't lied to her. And he had, however incidentally, protected her. Her trust in her mission was shattered. All that was left was the need for the truth. She did not take his hand. Instead, she gave him a sharp, decisive nod. Temporary. An alliance of convenience. We find out what the HPSC is hiding. Then, you and I will settle our own accounts. Naruto's smile returned, this time with a genuine warmth that reached his eyes. Fair enough, Commander. He glanced up at the night sky, at the blanket of stars that the city's light pollution couldn't quite extinguish. Good, because the real storm isn't down here. With a gesture, he released the gravity quirk. The HPSC agents gasped for air, still disoriented. Before they could recover, Naruto placed a hand on Kathleen's shoulder. The world dissolved into a dizzying, nauseating blur as he folded space around them. They vanished from the rooftop, leaving behind a squad of defeated secret heroes and a declaration of war that no one but the two of them had heard. They reappeared in a dark, quiet alleyway miles away, the distant sirens of the city serving as the only witness to the birth of the world's most unlikely and most powerful alliance. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Price of Power. The air in the abandoned subway station was cold and tasted of damp concrete and rust. It was a cavernous, forgotten space. A skeletal ribcage beneath the city's flesh. Emergency lights, powered by a jury-rigged generator Naruto had assembled with frightening speed, cast long, dancing shadows that made the tiled walls weep with moisture. This was their sanctuary, their command center. It was, Kathleen had to admit, tactically sound. Multiple access tunnels, acoustically confusing, and completely off every city grid. It was also filthy. This is your idea of a safe house? She asked, her voice echoing in the vastness. She ran a gloved finger along a rusted railing, grimacing at the grime. Her military training screamed for order, for clean lines and defensible perimeters. This was a tomb. It's anonymous, defensible, and temporary, Naruto replied without looking up. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a constellation of salvaged electronics. Wires snaked from a high-end laptop, clearly stolen, to a series of strange, repurposed devices. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his focus absolute. It's perfect. No one looks for ghosts in a graveyard. He had an answer for everything. His logic was a fortress, each statement a perfectly placed stone. It was infuriating. She had spent her life as the one in control, the one with the plan. Now she was the passenger, her entire world upended by a blonde enigma who treated god-like abilities like items on a grocery list. The HPSC won't stop, she stated, crossing her arms. They sent their best after us once. They'll do it again. We need a strategy, a real one. Not just hiding in a sewer. We're not hiding, we're preparing the battlefield. He corrected, his eyes still glued to the screen. He gestured to the array of devices around him. This is a composite sensor suite. I'm weaving together 4 different quirks. One detects vibrations in the earth. He tapped a device that hummed softly. One analyzes atmospheric particulates, another monitors fluctuations in the electromagnetic spectrum, and the last one is a low-level precognitive quirk I picked up from a card sharp. It gives me a 1 or 2 second warning of immediate hostile intent. Together, they create a perimeter defense system far more effective than any tripwire. No one will get within 5 blocks of this station without me knowing. Kathleen stared. He spoke of combining the fundamental forces of reality as if he were mixing paint. It was a casual display of power that was more terrifying than any overt threat. He wasn't just a collector. He was a horrifyingly innovative artist, and stolen quirks were his medium. And while we wait for your science project to work, what's the plan? Intel, he said simply. He finally looked up, his blue eyes intense. The HPSC tried to kill you. You, America's #1 hero, their guest. EY didn't do it because I stole some B-lister's earthquake quirk. An organization that calculating doesn't take a risk that big unless they're protecting a secret that is even bigger. We need to find out what that secret is. He turned the laptop around. On the screen was a secure login portal for the HPSC's internal server. Their mainline servers are a fortress. Impenetrable, she said, reciting the official assessment from global intelligence briefings. No, they're not, Naruto countered. They just assume no one has the key. But I do. He closed his eyes for a second. Kathleen could almost feel the shift inside him. A flicking through an invisible Rolodex of stolen lives. I have the biometric data of their head of IT, taken from him when he was a villain shaking down restaurants in his college days. I have a password cipher quirk from a corporate espionage specialist, and a low-level technopathy quirk that lets me talk to machines. They built a stone wall, but I'm a ghost. I'll just walk through it. He turned back to the laptop and began to type. Within minutes, the secure portal bypassed, he was in. Kathleen watched, a knot of unease and grudging admiration tightening in her stomach. He was a force of nature. A one-man insurgency who played by a set of rules she was only just beginning to comprehend. She had been trained to break down doors. He simply walked through the walls. The deeper they went, the dirtier it got. The HPSC servers were a labyrinth of secrets and lies. They found files on illegal surveillance operations targeting government officials, blackmail. Material on heroes who had stepped out of line, and covert programs designed to re-educate villains who couldn't be controlled. It was a cesspool of systemic corruption that made Kathleen's blood run cold. She had dedicated her life to upholding an ideal, and these were the people who had been writing the rulebook. Here we are, Naruto murmured, his voice tight. He pulled up two files. One was labeled Collector, the other, Star and Stripe. Hers was a detailed psychological and threat assessment profile, accurate and unnervingly insightful. His was almost entirely redacted, filled with black bars and coded warnings. But one line stood out. Subjects' acquisitions show an exponential increase in strategic value. Containment protocols have failed. Final sanction is authorized. Final sanction, Kathleen read aloud. Her voice grim. They're not trying to capture you anymore. They're trying to erase you. Sensible, Naruto said with a detached calm. If I were them, I'd do the same. He kept digging, his fingers a blur. He wasn't looking for files on himself anymore. He was following a different trail, a whisper of a keyword he had picked up in the encrypted chatter between HPSC command sectors. A project name. Project Otsutsuki, she said, trying to sound out the unfamiliar word. The name hit Naruto like a physical blow. His hands froze over the keyboard. A memory, sharp and unwanted, pierced the veil of his new life. A pale, horned woman, her face a mask of serene arrogance as she floated above a world of ash and bone. The name Kagaya echoed in the silent corners of his mind. He shook his head, pushing the memory down. It's nothing, he said, too quickly. But Kathleen saw it, a flicker of something in his eyes. Not fear, something older, a deep, world-weary sorrow. Before she could press him, an alarm, soft and insidious, chimed from his makeshift sensor array. A single red light pulsed in the gloom. Company, Naruto said, his voice instantly shifting from focused hacker to field commander. He snapped the laptop shut. One individual, moving fast. They're not using conventional transport. And they're masking their energy signature, but they can't hide the way they're disturbing the air. They're good. He looked up at her, his eyes clear and sharp. They sent their hunter. Kathleen's fists clenched. Her rage at the HPSC's betrayal coalesced into a single, sharp point of focus. Good. Let him come. No, Naruto countered, already moving. We don't fight in our base. We don't fight on their terms. We fight on mine. He led her through a labyrinth of service tunnels, moving with a silent, confident familiarity. He wasn't just navigating the darkness, he owned it. They emerged into the rain-slicked night in a sprawling, deserted industrial district. A maze of rust-colored warehouses and skeletal cranes. The air was thick with the smell of salt from the nearby bay. He'll follow the trail my quirks leave, Naruto explained, his voice low. He'll expect me to run, to hide. So we'll do the opposite. We'll wait for him right here. He pointed to a large, open plaza between two massive warehouses. A perfect kill box. A direct confrontation. Kathleen questioned, her tactical mind assessing the terrain. It's an ambush, but it leaves us exposed. It does, Naruto agreed. Which is why he'll be looking for the trap. He'll be cautious. He'll try to analyze my abilities from a distance. He'll be so focused on what I'm going to do that he won't be prepared for what you are going to do." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the brilliant, unconventional strategist that lived behind the detached facade. He wasn't just powerful, he was dangerous. "You are the most powerful person on this planet, Kathleen," he said, using her first name for the first time. It sounded strange, yet strangely natural. "Your power is absolute. He will have a counter for me. He will have no counter for you. When I give the signal, I don't need you to be a hero. I need you to be a hammer." He arrived like a whisper in the rain. A figure in sleek, dark gray armor, his face obscured by a featureless chrome visor. He stood in the center of the plaza, seemingly unfazed by the downpour. He was the only calm thing in the storm. This was Hero. Silencer. Naruto and Kathleen watched from the rooftop of one of the warehouses. "His quirk allows him to create zones of selective physics," Naruto murmured, his enhanced senses analyzing the man. "He can't erase powers, but he can designate an area and declare, for example, that fire cannot exist within it. Or that kinetic energy is halved. He's not a fighter. He's a walking rulebook, a perfect counter for someone who relied on a versatile arsenal of abilities." Silencer raised a hand, and a ripple, visible only as a slight distortion in the falling rain, expanded from him in a 50-meter radius. "The field is up," Naruto said. He felt it instantly. The background hum of several of his more exotic quirks, the precognitive one. The spatial warp, simply, switched off. They were still there, but within Silencer's domain, they were unusable. "What's the signal?" Kathleen asked, her muscles coiled, ready to unleash the storm she held within her. "Patience," Naruto whispered. He dropped from the roof, landing silently in the plaza 50 feet from his opponent. He didn't engage. He just stood there, letting the rain soak his jacket. "Collector." Silencer's voice was a digitized monotone, devoid of emotion. "By the authority of the Hero Public Safety Commission, you are to be neutralized. Cease resistance." "I'm always open to a spirited debate," Naruto called back, his tone conversational. "But I have a feeling you're not much of a talker." He dashed forward. As he did, he activated Tremor's quirk, sending a fissure of shattered asphalt racing toward Silencer. The hero didn't move. Just before the seismic attack reached him, it fizzled out, the ground resealing itself as if the attack had never happened. "Rule change," Silencer's synthesized voice announced. "Uncontrolled geological disruption is now forbidden." Naruto stopped, a smirk playing on his lips. "Clever." He held out his hands, and thick, writhing tendrils of solid shadow, a quirk taken from a creature of the night, shot toward Silencer. They too dissolved into harmless smoke as they entered the hero's field of influence. Dark matter constructs are now forbidden. It was a battle of attrition. For every power Naruto displayed, Silencer simply wrote a new rule to negate it. It was the ultimate defense. But Naruto wasn't trying to win. He was probing, mapping the limits, and he was stalling. "You're running out of tricks, Collector," Silencer stated. "Oh, I have plenty of tricks," Naruto said. He looked past Silencer, up at the warehouse behind him. "I was just waiting for the right moment to use my best one." "Now, Kathleen." Silencer spun around, his attention drawn to the warehouse. It was the feint. Kathleen wasn't on the warehouse roof anymore. She was in the air, 100 feet above the plaza, having used the signal to quietly launch herself into the sky, cloaked by the storm clouds. And as Silencer looked away, Naruto's real attack began. He didn't use a flashy quirk. He used something simple, something so fundamental Silencer hadn't even thought to forbid it. A minor illusion quirk, taken from a street magician, that created a perfect, silent, invisible copy of himself standing right where he was. At the same time, he activated a sensory scrambling ability, not an attack, but a sub-TLE distortion of sound and light that would confuse his opponent's senses for a critical half-second. Then he moved, his physical body a blur of pure, unadulterated speed, a simple reinforcement Quirk augmenting his shinobi-trained muscles. Silencer's visor registered the illusion, and he prepared to negate whatever came next. But his sensors were a fraction of a second too slow to register the R.E.L. Naruto closing the distance from the side. By the time Silencer realized his mistake, it was too late. Naruto was on him, his hand reaching not for his neck, but for the side of his helmet. He ripped it off, revealing a startled, pale face underneath. At the same moment, a shadow fell over them. Kathleen descended like a vengeful angel, wreathed in an aura of pure, unassailable power. She wasn't using a quirk. She was the hammer. She slammed into the ground, her landing cratering the asphalt. She didn't touch Silencer. She didn't need to. The sheer force of her arrival was enough. Silencer was thrown back, his concentration shattered, his quirk nullifying field collapsing like a popped balloon. All of Naruto's stolen abilities came roaring back to life. Before the dazed hero could even think of reactivating his power, Naruto was there, a single finger pressed against the man's forehead. Silencer froze, his eyes wide with terror. He knew what came next. He braced himself for the feeling of violation, of emptiness. Kathleen landed beside them, her expression a mask of grim determination. It's over. She watched Naruto, her breath held. This was the moment, the moral event horizon. Would he do it? Would he take the man's power, the very core of his being, simply because he could? Naruto looked from the terrified man at his feet to the powerful woman standing beside him. He saw the question in her eyes. The silent challenge. He had wanted her to be a hammer, and she had been. But he saw now that she was also his witness, his judge, and for some reason he couldn't yet fathom, her verdict mattered. He sighed. He let the hunger of all for one rise, let it taste the unique, complex flavor of Silencer's quirk. And then, with a will that was entirely his own, he pushed the hunger down. He didn't take it. Instead, he activated a different quirk, a subtle and precise neurological ability. The man's eyes went glassy for a moment, then cleared. His expression shifted from terror to utter confusion. He looked at the cratered ground, at Star and Stripe, at the strange blonde man in front of him, and had no idea how he had gotten there. Who? What happened? Silencer asked, his voice now fully human. You tried to stop a robbery. You took a nasty blow to the head, Naruto said smoothly. You're a hero. Go be one. He turned and walked away. Back in the cold silence of the subway station. The tension between them had changed. The suspicion was still there, but it was now threaded with something else. A strand of respect. You let him go, Kathleen said. It wasn't a question. His quirk was useless to me, Naruto said, booting up the laptop again. It's reactive, defensive. I'm a predator. I have no use for a turtle's shell. It was a logical, cold explanation. But she knew it was a lie. She had seen the flicker of conflict in his eyes on the battlefield. She had seen him make a choice. That's not why you did it, she said softly. Naruto stopped typing. He leaned back against the concrete wall. The screen's glow illuminating his face. He looked tired, not physically, but with a deep, soul-level weariness. Power is a burden, Kathleen, he said, his voice quiet. Every quirk I take, I remember the person it came from. Their fears, their ambitions, their pain. It's all in there, a library of broken lives. I only take what I absolutely need. I didn't need his. In that moment, he wasn't the collector. He wasn't a ghost or a monster. He was just a man, impossibly powerful and profoundly alone, trying to keep from drowning in the sea of souls he carried inside him. It was the first crack in his fortress, the first glimpse of the prisoner within. He turned back to the screen, his professional mask sliding back into place. I found something in their deep storage. Encrypted. But the project name is the same. He pulled up a file. It wasn't a report or a memo. It was a star chart. A highly detailed map of a sector of deep space, far beyond their solar system. And it was tracking the trajectory of something. An object, moving at impossible speeds, on a direct course for Earth. Its energy signature was unlike anything Kathleen had ever seen. At the bottom of the chart was a single, chilling annotation. ETA, T-84 days. Threat profile. God. They looked at the screen, then at each other. The rain continued to fall on the city above, oblivious. They had hunted the HPSC for their lies and found a truth that was infinitely more terrifying. They weren't just dealing with a conspiracy anymore. They were staring at an apocalypse. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Whispers of a celestial threat. The silence in the aftermath of their discovery was heavier than the tons of earth and steel above them. For 84 days, the world would continue its chaotic spin. Blissfully unaware that it was on a countdown to extinction. The HPSC's political games, the daily drama of heroes and villains, it all felt like the squabbling of children in a house that was already on fire. Kathleen paced the length of the subway platform, the rhythmic tap of her boots the only sound besides the hum of Naruto's stolen technology. She was a creature of action, of clear objectives and overwhelming force. This quiet, gnawing dread was a foreign poison, and it was maddening. "Otsutsuki," she said, the word feeling alien and sharp on her tongue. "You recognized that name. Back on the server. Don't lie to me, Naruto." Not now. He was leaning against a support pillar, his gaze lost in the oppressive darkness of the tunnel. The detached, almost arrogant confidence he usually wore had been stripped away, replaced by a deep, resonant gravity. He looked older, burdened by a history she couldn't begin to guess at. "It's a name from a story," he said, his voice low and rough. "A myth from a world that isn't this one. About pale-skinned demons who came from the stars to devour worlds." "A myth," she repeated, her tone laced with disbelief. "That trajectory on the star chart wasn't a myth. That energy signature wasn't a myth. And that thread profile wasn't a damn myth." "I know," he said softly. He finally met her eyes, and the sheer, ancient weariness in his gaze silenced her. Sometimes the old stories are the only ones that tell the truth. He was holding back. His secrets were a wall between them, thicker than any concrete. Before she could press him to demand the answers she deserved, a shrill, discordant alarm shrieked from his sensor array. Every light on the board flashed a frantic, chaotic red. "What is that?" Kathleen snapped, instantly shifting into a combat stance. "Is it the HPSC?" "No," Naruto said, his eyes wide as he stared at the readings. The data scrolled across the screen in a torrent of incomprehensible symbols. "This isn't a person. This isn't a vehicle. It's everything." He grabbed the laptop. "The entire energy grid of the city's central district is fluctuating. Gravity, electromagnetism, even atmospheric press. Sure, the laws of physics are being rewritten in a 3-block radius." On a small monitor displaying a live news feed, the screen showed a chaotic scene. A news helicopter was filming from a safe distance. Its camera focused on Musutafu Central Park. The lush green space was now a canvas of surreal horror. Cherry blossom trees bloomed, withered, and turned to dust in the space of seconds. The large ornamental pond was frozen solid one moment and boiling the next. People were fleeing in terror, their screams lost in the strange, silent chaos. At the very center of it all, standing calmly beside the park's main fountain, was a figure. Even on the grainy news feed, he was unmistakable. He was tall and unnaturally slender, dressed in elegant white and gray robes that seemed to absorb the light. His skin was a ghostly, chalk white, and from his head protruded two short, dark, horn-like growths. He wasn't doing anything. He was simply standing there, his mere presence enough to unravel the fabric of reality around him. "A myth," Kathleen breathed, a cold dread snaking its way up her spine. Naruto was already moving, his face a mask of cold, hard fury. The weariness was gone, replaced by the lethal focus of a soldier who had just seen his oldest enemy step onto the battlefield. "That's not a villain," he said, his voice a low growl. "That's a harvestman. He's not here to fight. He's here to take samples." He pulled on his black jacket, his movements economical and precise. "Stay away from him. Don't let him touch you. And don't expect the rules you know to apply." They arrived to a war zone where only one side had fired a shot. The perimeter of Central Park was a mess of abandoned police cars and ambulances. A handful of pro-heroes lay scattered across the grass, groaning and clutching their heads. They weren't injured, but their faces were pale, their bodies drained of all vitality, as if they had aged 50 years in a matter of moments. The dragon hero, Yukio, was on one knee, her massive draconic form flickering and shrinking back to her human size, unable to maintain the transformation. "His power, it's like a void," she rasped to a paramedic. "It doesn't fight you, it just consumes." Naruto and Kathleen moved past the chaos, their eyes fixed on the figure by the fountain. Up close, he was even more unsettling. His expression was one of mild, academic boredom, like a biologist observing an ant farm. His eyes, a pale lavender with a strange, rippling pattern, held no malice, only a profound and absolute indifference. Such a primitive world, the being said, his voice not loud, but carrying with impossible clarity. He tilted his head, his gaze sweeping over the paralyzed heroes. So much energy, all wasted in these crude, individualistic manifestations. A garden left untended for far too long. He raised a hand, and a small, gnarled tree sprouted from the concrete at his feet, growing to its full height in seconds before crumbling into white ash. He seemed pleased by the result. "That's far enough, monster," a voice boomed. The number 5 hero, Edgeshot, appeared in a blur of motion, his body folded into a razor-thin spear. He moved faster than sound, aiming for a vital point at the base of the alien's neck. The white-skinned being, Yorinobu, didn't even turn his head. He simply held up a single, slender finger. Edgeshot's attack, a technique that could pierce hardened steel, impacted the finger and stopped dead. There was no shockwave, no sound. All of the kinetic energy, all of the focused mass and velocity, was simply absorbed. Gone. Yorinobu looked at his finger, then back at the stunned hero. Interesting. You can manipulate your own biological structure. A low-grade version of the all-consuming ash bones. He flicked his finger. Edgeshot was sent flying back. Not with a concussive blast, but as if a fundamental force had simply decided he needed to be elsewhere. He crashed into a tree and slumped to the ground, unconscious. This was a slaughter. No, it was less than that. It was pest control. "I'll draw his fire," Kathleen said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. Her body began to glow with a faint, powerful aura. "You find a weakness." "There is no weakness," Naruto said grimly. "There's only opportunity." Kathleen didn't wait. She shot forward, a red, white, and blue missile, leaving a trench in the soft earth behind her. She didn't bother with subtlety. This was a monster that negated powers. She would rely on the one thing that was truly hers. Pure, unadulterated force. New order. She roared, her voice an absolute command that shook the very air. "The atmosphere in front of my fist is now as dense as osmium." She threw a punch aimed at Yorinobu's center mass, a blow that carried the conceptual weight of a collapsing star. It should have pulverized him. It should have leveled the entire park. Yorinobu watched the attack approach with the same mild curiosity. As the blow was about to land, a thin, black rod, no larger than a knitting needle, materialized in his hand. He held it out, and it touched the super-dense pocket of air in front of Kathleen's fist. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The rule, the absolute command she had placed upon reality, was siphoned away. The osmium-dense air vanished, and her fist, carrying enough force to shatter a mountain, met only empty space. Her momentum carried her past him, throwing her off balance. For the first time in her life, Kathleen Bate was truly shocked. Her power, the ability that made her the strongest woman on Earth, had been cancelled. Erased as easily as a child wiping a drawing from a chalkboard. A fascinating ability, Yorinobu noted, studying the black rod, which now glowed with a faint energy. To impose one's will upon the phenomenal world. It is a crude imitation of creation of all things. You are a most unusual specimen. He spun, his movements impossibly fluid, and lashed out with a backhand strike. Kathleen barely managed to get her arms up to block. The impact felt like being hit by a freight train. She was thrown back dozens of feet, her arms screaming in protest. The sheer physical power of the creature was immense, completely independent of his strange abilities. As Yorinobu turned his attention to the downed hero, Naruto made his move. He didn't attack directly. He used a spatial warp to appear directly behind the Otsutsuki. His hand outstretched, palm glowing with the hungry energy of all for one. He had to know. He had to see what this power was. His fingers made contact with the back of Yorinobu's robes. The moment he touched him, his mind exploded. It wasn't the feeling of a quirk, a river of power he could divert and claim. It was the ocean, an endless, cosmic abyss of power, ancient and cold and utterly alien. He felt a blast of psychic feedback, a billion years of history crashing into his consciousness. He saw dying stars and nascent galaxies. He saw planets being cultivated like fields. their populations drained of life to grow colossal, world-breaking trees. He saw the Otsutsuki clan, a celestial parasite, moving from world to world in an endless cycle of harvest and consumption. And he felt their terrifying, singular purpose: to evolve, to consume all power until they themselves became gods. The feedback was too much. It was a torrent of pure information that threatened to shred his sanity. He pulled his hand back with a choked cry, stumbling away, his head pounding. His nose was bleeding. Yorinobu turned, his pale lavender eyes fixing on Naruto for the first time. The bored indifference was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise. "Well now," the Otsutsuki murmured, his gaze analytical. "What is this? The energy signature is that of this world's cattle, yet there is an echo. A faint, diluted scent of our chakra. A parasite feeding on the scraps of our garden. How did a creature like you come to exist?" Before Naruto could answer, Kathleen was back in the fight. She couldn't use her conceptual power, so she used the raw physical enhancement New Order afforded her. She moved with blinding speed, her fists crashing against Yorinobu, each blow strong enough to crater the ground. She was a hurricane, a relentless force of nature. It was a beautiful, desperate, and ultimately futile assault. Yorinobu met her blows effortlessly, blocking, parrying, and redirecting her own strength against her. He was toying with her. "Your strength is impressive," he conceded, catching one of her fists in his open palm. For a primitive, Naruto saw his opening. Kathleen had Yorinobu's full attention. He activated a dozen quirks at once. He stomped, using Tremor's power to turn the ground beneath Yorinobu's feet into churning quicksand. He clapped his hands, using a concussive sound quirk to create a deafening blast next to the alien's ear. He bent the light, creating a blinding flash of solar intensity. It was a perfectly coordinated sensory assault, designed to disorient and overwhelm. For a fraction of a second, it worked. Yorinobu's concentration wavered. He released Kathleen's fist to steady himself. "Kathleen, now!" "Combined assault!" Naruto yelled. She understood instantly. She didn't throw a punch. She focused all her power, all her will, into a single point. Naruto, meanwhile, pulled a unique quirk from his arsenal, one taken from a long-forgotten hero: energy amplification. He aimed it at Kathleen, a shimmering beam of power that wrapped around her, multiplying her output tenfold. She roared, and instead of striking, she shed a wave of pure kinetic force from her body, a shockwave of raw, physical power, now magnified to an impossible degree. The combined attack slammed into Yorinobu. For the first time, the alien was thrown from his feet. The blast tore through the park, ripping trees from their roots and turning the fountain to dust. Yorinobu skidded across the ground for 100 meters, a long, deep trench carved in his wake. He came to a stop, and slowly, he got to his feet. His elegant robes were torn. A thin trickle of a strange, silvery fluid, blood, ran from the corner of his mouth. He looked at the two of them, and the academic curiosity was gone. It was replaced by a genuine, chilling interest. He smiled. "So, the fruit on this world has developed thorns," he said, his voice laced with something akin to delight. "How fascinating." He looked directly at Naruto, his rippling eyes seeming to peer into his very soul. "You carry the scent of our clan, little parasite. The main family will be most interested in dissecting you to see how you function." He wiped the silver blood from his lip. His work here was done. He had his samples. He had confirmed the world was ripe. He raised a hand and tore a hole in reality itself, a swirling black and purple vortex of pure emptiness that hummed with a sickening energy. "The harvest will begin on schedule," Yorinobu said, as a final parting shot. "Enjoy the last days of your insignificant history." He stepped into the portal, and it snapped shut behind him, leaving nothing but an unnerving silence and the scent of ozone. They were alone, standing in the wreckage of the park, surrounded by the unconscious bodies of the nation's finest heroes. Naruto was panting, the psychic backlash still echoing in his skull. Kathleen stood rigid, her hands clenched into fists, her mind reeling from the violation of having her absolute power so casually dismissed. They hadn't won. They had survived. They had managed to bloody a god, and in doing so, had ONLY succeeded in drawing its undivided attention. The HPSC conspiracy, the life they had known, it was all meaningless now. Kathleen finally turned to look at Naruto, her face grim, stripped of all its former arrogance. There was a new, hard-won understanding in her eyes, and a question that eclipsed all others. "What are you, Naruto?" He looked back at her, the weight of a world he'd left behind. And the terror of the one that was coming crashing down on him. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. His silence was the only answer he could give. It was an admission of a truth far stranger and more terrible than she could possibly imagine. The countdown was no longer a number on a screen. It was a promise. The harvest was coming. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Fugitive and the Hero. The world came crashing back in a cacophony of sirens. The pristine, reality-warping silence left by the Otsutsuki was torn apart by the approaching roar of the HPSC's rapid response teams. Red and blue lights strobed through the ruined park, painting the carnage in frantic, repeating flashes. "We have to move. Now." Naruto's voice was a blade, cutting through Kathleen's shock. He grabbed her arm, his touch grounding her. She was still reeling, not from the fight, but from the chilling ease with which her ultimate power had been dismissed. It was like an immovable object discovering it could, in fact, be moved. The sensation was profoundly unsettling. But the soldier in her took over. She shook her head, clearing the fog. "Agreed. Where?" "Everywhere and nowhere," he answered. He pulled a small, metallic sphere from his pocket and crushed it. A thick, billowing cloud of black smoke, far denser than a normal smoke bomb, instantly engulfed them. It didn't just block sight, it was ed with a sensory jamming quirk that would overload any electronic surveillance and confuse scent-based trackers. Under the cover of the smoke, he didn't run. He placed a hand on her shoulder and folded space. The world twisted into a nauseating smear of color and light for a fraction of a second, then snapped back into focus. They were in a dark, narrow alleyway, the sounds of the sirens already fainter, muffled by a dozen city blocks. "That's a useful trick," she said, her stomach doing a slow roll. "It has a cool-down and a limited range. And it leaves a unique spatial residue they can probably track if we use it too often." He replied, already moving. He was all cold, hard pragmatism. "We go low-tech." He led them on a dizzying, circuitous route through the city's underbelly. They moved through storm drains that smelled of rot and forgotten history, across the rooftops of sleeping residential districts, and through the back rooms of all-night noodle shops where Naruto exchanged quiet words and a thick wad of cash for temporary passage. He navigated the hidden pathways of the city like it was his own circulatory system. He had been a ghost for years, and he knew all the places where the light didn't reach. They finally emerged in a grimy, automated parking garage near the city's industrial port. Naruto walked up to a nondescript black sedan, placed his palm on the driver's side window. And the lock clicked open. A moment later, the engine purred to life. "Don't tell me," Kathleen said, sliding into the passenger seat. "You took the quirk of a car thief." "No," Naruto said, pulling out of the garage and merging into the sparse pre-dawn traffic. He pointed to his temple. "Eidetic memory. Saw a guy input the keyless entry code a week ago. Some quirks are more useful than others." As he drove, the adrenaline of the fight and the escape began to fade, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. They were fugitives, hunted by the most powerful organization in the country, and by a celestial monster from beyond the stars. Kathleen stared out the window at the city lights blurring past. She had always been the one flying above it all, a symbol of hope in the sky. Now she was down here, in the dark, a ghost just like him. "The HPSC will lock down the country," she said, thinking aloud. "Airports, ports, train stations. They'll have my face and yours on every screen. There's nowhere to go. Then we go where there are no screens," he said, turning the car onto a coastal highway that snaked away from the city's glow. The dark, churning expanse of the Pacific Ocean opened up on their left. "We go where there's nothing but rock, water, and time to think." The lighthouse stood on a jagged finger of land that clawed its way into the sea. It had been decommissioned for 50 years. A forgotten relic from a time before satellite navigation. The paint was peeling, the glass of the lamp room was clouded with salt and grime, and the wind howled around it with a lonely, mournful sound. It was perfect. For 2 days, they worked. Naruto, using a dozen minor quirks, a mending ability to patch the leaky roof, a purification quirk to make the stagnant water in the cistern drinkable, a kinetic quirk to haul salvaged supplies up the winding stairs, turned the derelict structure into a defensible, livable base. Kathleen, reverting to her military roots, established watch schedules, scouted the surrounding coastline, and planned out defensive contingencies. They worked with a quiet, efficient synergy, 2 apex predators building a nest. On the 3rd night, the storm broke. Not outside, where the waves crashed against the rocks in a steady, soothing rhythm, but inside the lamproom of the lighthouse. Kathleen stood before him, her arms crossed, her silhouette framed by the star-dusted sky visible through the salt-stained glass. I've given you time. I've followed your lead. No more. I'm done with stories and myths. I fought that thing. I felt its power. I want the truth, Naruto. All of it. What are they? And what in God's name are you? He was sitting on the floor, the glow of his laptop casting his face in a pale blue light. He had been decrypting the HPSC files he'd managed to copy before they fled the subway. He closed the laptop slowly. He looked out at the dark, endless ocean, a mirror of the cosmic abyss he carried in his memories. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of ages. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he began, his voice quiet, stripped of all its usual irony and detachment. And I'm not from this world. He told her everything. He spoke of a world of shinobi, of hidden villages and endless wars. He told her about chakra, the spiritual energy that flowed through all living things in his world. He told her about the tailed beasts, colossal beings of pure chakra, and how he had been made the jailer of the strongest of them, the 9 tails. He spoke of a great war, of a resurrected goddess named Kagaya Otsutsuki, a pale, horned woman who had consumed the fruit of a god tree and enslaved the world with her power. She was the first, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The progenitor of chakra on our world. But she wasn't the last. Her clan, they are locusts. They travel from world to world, planting these god trees that suck a planet dry of all its life, all its energy, until it's nothing but a dead husk. Then a fruit blooms, and one of them eats it, gaining all the power of that dead world. It's how they evolve. It's what they do. Kathleen listened, her expression unreadable. Every tactical instinct, every rational part of her brain screamed that this was impossible, a delusion. But she had seen Yorinobu. She had felt his alien power. Naruto's impossible story was the only thing that fit the impossible facts. So the one in the park. A scout, Naruto confirmed. A low-ranking member of a branch family, maybe. He was here to test the planet's defenses, to see if the fruit was ready for harvest. Quirks, chakra, to them. It's all just energy. Our energy. And they're coming to collect it. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were raw with a vulnerability she had never seen before. I died fighting her, I think. The last thing I remember is a flash of light. Then I woke up here, in this world. A teenager again, with all my memories, and this. He held up his hand, the one that could steal a person's soul. All for one. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I know what's coming for us. I've seen what they do to worlds that can't fight back. Here it was, the truth. He was a refugee from another reality. A soldier from a lost war, cursed with a monster's power and haunted by a god's return. He wasn't a predator by choice. He was a survivor, doing the only thing he knew how to do. Accumulate enough power to never be a victim again. The silence stretched. Kathleen walked to the window, staring out at the same dark ocean. She thought of her own life. The crushing weight of being a symbol. The posters. The action figures. The adoring crowds. The profound loneliness of being on a pedestal, of having everyone know your name but no one know you. She was Star and Stripe, the commander. America's #1. But who was Kathleen Bate? When my quirk manifested, she said softly, not turning around, it terrified me. New order. The ability to impose a new rule on my surroundings. The first time I used it, I was 7. A stray dog was about to be hit by a car. I screamed, the dog is invincible. And the car, it wrapped around the dog like tinfoil. The driver was almost killed. She finally turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. They taught me control. They taught me to be a symbol. To be a hero. But they never let me forget that I was a weapon. That my power, unchecked, could break the world. We're not so different, you and I. We both carry a power that sets us apart. That makes us alone. In that moment, in the lamp room of a forgotten lighthouse, they were no longer the fugitive and the hero. They were just Naruto and Kathleen. Two lonely souls, burdened with impossible power, finding a flicker of understanding in the shared darkness. The quiet moment was broken by a soft chime from Naruto's laptop. "I'm in," he murmured, his voice thick with renewed purpose. "The deepest level of the HPSC server. I found their apocalypse file." He turned the screen towards her. The file was designated Project Izanagi. It was a chronicle of utter horror. The HPSC had known about the Otsutsuki for 3 years, ever since a Deep Space P. Robe had sent back a corrupted data burst containing images of a world being consumed in a partial analysis of the energy signatures. They knew they couldn't win a conventional fight, so they had started trying to build a god of their own. They were trying to replicate All for One, Naruto said, his voice grim as he scrolled through lab reports and videos that made Kathleen's stomach turn. They kidnapped dozens of people, villains and civilians, with specific, powerful quirks. They tried to forcibly merge them, to create a single being that could hold multiple abilities. A weapon to fight the invaders. He played a short video clip. A monstrous, multi-limbed creature, screaming with a dozen different voices, lashed out with a chaotic storm of uncontrolled quirks before being incinerated by automated defenses. Every attempt failed, Naruto continued. They just created unstable, mindless monsters. Then, I showed up. A naturally occurring, stable holder of All for One. I wasn't just a threat to them. I was the miracle they had been trying and failing to create. They weren't trying to capture me to lock me away. They wanted to dissect me. To learn my secret. They wanted to turn me into their god killer. Kathleen felt a wave of nausea. The HPSC's ruthless pragmatism was a cancer, willing to sacrifice anyone and anything for their twisted version of the greater good. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the howl of the wind. A high-pitched, rhythmic beeping. A small device Naruto had placed on the windowsill, a modified receiver tuned to the local fauna, began to flash. "Perimeter breach," he said, his voice dropping back into its combat chill. He was already on his feet. The gulls just changed their flight pattern. Something spooked them. "They're here." Kathleen moved to the window, peering down at the thin, winding road that led to the lighthouse. In the distance, she saw 3 sets of headlights. "How did they find us?" she asked, her fists clenching. Naruto glanced at the laptop, a grim understanding dawning on his face. "They didn't track us. They tracked the data. When I broke into their Izanagi file, it must have triggered a silent alarm that triangulated my position. It was a trap." He looked at her, his blue eyes as sharp and clear as chips of ice. "They know what we know. They can't let us live." He grabbed his jacket. The brief moment of vulnerability was gone. Locked away again behind the fortress of the survivor. "The plan is the same as before," he said. "I draw their fire. You be the hammer." Kathleen nodded, a cold fury burning in her chest. "No," she corrected him, a dangerous smile touching her lips. "This time, we are the storm." They descended the lighthouse stairs, not as fugitives running from the dark, but as 2 forces of nature, moving in perfect concert. Ready to unleash a tempest on the hunters who had foolishly followed them into it. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Declaration of War. The headlights cut through the sea mist. 2 pairs of accusing eyes advancing up the winding coastal road. They moved with the unhurried confidence of predators that knew their prey was cornered. Inside the lighthouse, the air was still and cold, charged with the electric hum of impending violence. 3 vehicles, 12 agents, based on standard HPSC strike team composition. Kathleen's voice was a low, steady report, her eyes narrowed. As she peered through a salt-grimed window. "They'll establish a perimeter, then move in with a quirk suppression field first." "Predictable," Naruto murmured beside her. He wasn't looking out the window. He was looking at the schematics of the HPSC's all-terrain vehicle he had memorized from their servers, his mind already 3 steps ahead. "They think we're trapped in the tower. They'll treat it like a static siege. And we're not going to be," she finished, a grim smile touching her lips. The fear and uncertainty of the last few days had been burned away, replaced by the cold, exhilarating clarity of battle. The hunter is most vulnerable when he's focused on the trap, Naruto said, turning from the window. He met her gaze, and in the dim light of the lantern room, a silent, absolute understanding passed between them. They were a single unit, a two-headed god of war. I'll be the distraction, you'll be the demolition. They moved down the winding staircase, their footsteps echoing in the stone tower. They didn't speak again. There was no need. The plan was an unspoken symphony of violence, and they were its virtuosos. The HPSC team moved with chilling efficiency. 10 agents, clad in matte black tactical gear, fanned out to form a cordon around the base of the lighthouse, while 2 remained with the vehicles, one of them deploying a large, tripod-mounted device that began to hum with a low, oppressive energy. The Quirk suppression field. Field is active, the team leader's voice crackled over their encrypted comms. All hostiles are now Quirk neutral. Breach in 3, 2. The ground beneath their feet erupted. Naruto, who had slipped out a lower window moments before they arrived, slammed his hands onto the rocky earth just outside the suppression field's radius. He channeled Tremor's Quirk, not in a destructive wave, but in a precise, violent tremor that shattered the ground under the HPSC squad. The agents cried out in shock as the very rock beneath them buckled and split, throwing them into disarray. Their perfect formation was broken, their siege instantly turned into a scramble for balance. It was the only opening Kathleen needed. She burst from the lighthouse's main entrance like a cannonball, a blur of red, white, and blue. The suppression field washed over her, a tangible wave of null energy that would have rendered any other hero powerless. It had absolutely no effect on her. Her power wasn't a switch to be flipped off, it was a fundamental constant of her being. She was not a person with a quirk. She was the quirk. She was the hammer. He crashed into the first 2 agents with the force of a freight train, sending them flying into the churning sea below. She moved through the others with a brutal, efficient grace. She wasn't using New Order to rewrite reality. She was using the raw, superhuman strength it afforded her, a baseline power level that was already far beyond what any normal human could withstand. A punch sent one agent crashing through the stone wall of the lighthouse. A kick snapped another's rifle in 2 before sending him tumbling across the rocks. As she dismantled the ground team, Naruto dealt with the vehicles. He warped behind the 2 agents at the rear, a shadow detaching from other shadows. Before they could even turn, he touched the back of their necks. He didn't take their quirks. He just activated a mild neural paralysis ability. And they slumped to the ground, unconscious. He placed his hand on the comms unit in the lead vehicle. Using his technopathy, he didn't just listen, he became the network. He felt the panicked shouts of the field agents, the confused queries from their distant command center. He absorbed their encryption keys, their network protocols, their entire communications infrastructure. He downloaded it all in the space of 3 seconds. Then he wiped their system clean, cutting them off from the world. The entire battle was over in 45 seconds. 10 agents were unconscious or incapacitated. Their state-of-the-art equipment broken, their mission an utter failure. Naruto stood over the unconscious team leader, calmly removing the man's helmet. Kathleen walked up behind him, not even breathing heavily. The sea mist swirled around them, carrying the scent of salt and ozone. "They'll send more," she said. "I know," Naruto replied, his attention focused on the HPSC vehicle. "They'll send bigger teams, better hunters. They'll level this whole peninsula if they have to. They think they can win by cornering us in the dark." He straightened up, turning to face her. A new, dangerous light burned in his eyes. "They're wrong. We've been letting them choose the battlefield. It's time we chose our own." He gestured to the vehicle's powerful, long-range broadcast array. "They hunt us in the shadows because that's where we're hiding. So we step into the light. All of it." Kathleen stared at the comms unit, then at him, the audacious, insane brilliance of his plan dawning on her. "You're not just talking about breaking radio silence. I'm talking about hijacking the global emergency broadcast system," he said, his voice humming with a newfound intensity. Quote, "I'm talking about putting our faces on every television, every phone, every computer screen on the planet. We're going to tell them everything. The Otsutsuki, Project Izanagi, The HPSC's lies were going to burn their whole shadowy world down with a single, undeniable truth. This was it, the point of no return. Agreeing to this was not just an act of defiance. It was a declaration of war against the entire established order. It was trading her fugitive status for that of a global revolutionary. It was terrifying, and it was the only move they had left. She thought of the HPSC president's smug, manipulative smile. She thought of Silencer's blind obedience. She thought of the horrors in the Izanagi files. She looked at Naruto, at the impossible soldier from another world who had shown her the rot beneath the gilded cage she had lived in. Her choice was clear. Where do we do it? She asked, her voice as solid as steel. A rare, triumphant smile spread across Naruto's face. You need the highest possible point for the strongest signal. A place everyone is watching. He looked north, back towards the distant glow of the city. We're going to the top of the Tokyo Skytree. The view on the observation deck of the Skytree was breathtaking. The sprawling neon galaxy of Tokyo spread out below them, a testament to the civilization they were about to irrevocably shatter. They had reached the top floor not as tourists, but as phantoms, using a combination of a phase-shifting quirk to walk through the walls and Naruto's spatial warping for the final ascent. The tower's broadcast control room was a small, automated chamber at the very pinnacle of the spire. Their broadcast system is a closed network, protected by the most advanced firewalls on the planet, Kathleen noted, watching as Naruto plugged a modified HPSC datapad into the main console. A firewall is just a wall, Naruto said, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. And I'm not going to break it down. I'm just going to convince the door to open for me. He closed his eyes. He channeled the technopathy quirk, whispering to the machine spirit of the broadcast network. He used the stolen HPSC encryption keys as a greeting. The password cipher quirk to solve the security handshake, and a low-level viral quirk to persuade the system that his signal was not only friendly, but a top priority, must ISS. UE emergency bulletin from the HPSC itself. Across the globe, screens went black. In Times Square, Piccadilly Circus, and Shibuya Crossing, colossal video billboards flickered and died. On phones in pockets and televisions in living rooms, broadcasts were cut mid-sentence. For a full 10 seconds, the world was held in a moment of shared, silent confusion. Then, a new image appeared. It was Naruto's face, clear and unmasked. His expression calm and severe, his piercing blue eyes seeming to look at each and every person watching. Behind him, the breathtaking panorama of Tokyo at night served as his backdrop. Good evening, his voice, amplified and broadcast to billions, was steady and clear. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I am not a hero. I am not a villain. I am the purveyor of an inconvenient truth. He began to speak. He didn't shout or preach. He laid out the facts with cold, irrefutable logic. He showed them the star chart from the HPSC's own servers, the trajectory of the object labeled Threat Profile, God. He told them its name, Otsutsuki. For 3 years, the people you have entrusted with your safety, the Hero Public Safety Commission, have known about this threat. They have known that an alien species of world devourers is on its way to harvest our planet. And they did not warn you. They did not prepare you. They hid the truth, because they believed you were too weak to handle it. He brought up the files for Project Izanagi, blurring the grotesque images but showing the project's title, its budget, its horrifying objective. Instead of uniting the world, they chose to build monsters in the dark. They chose to sacrifice your freedom and your lives for their own desperate, failed experiments. They have failed in their duty as your protectors. Their secrets are a threat greater than any villain. Their lies are the true crisis. The camera pulled back, and Kathleen stepped into the frame. The world gasped. It was one thing to hear these claims from an unknown face. It was another to see them legitimized by the most powerful and trusted hero on the planet. Everything he has said is the truth. Kathleen's voice was a clarion call, filled with the unwavering conviction that had inspired millions. I have seen the evidence with my own eyes. I was sent to Japan to neutralize this man. Instead, I discovered a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of global power. I can no longer, in good conscience, serve a system that would so profoundly betray the trust of its people. She looked directly into the camera, her gaze a burning mixture of fury and resolve. As of this moment, I am severing all ties with the United States government and the Hero Public Safety Commission. My power does not belong to any flag or any committee. My allegiance is to the people of this planet. All of them. And right now, the only person telling you the truth is the man standing beside me. We have 81 days. The time for secrets is over. The time to fight back is now. It was a bombshell that shook the foundations of the world. Just as her last word echoed, a blur of crimson shot past the window of the control room. A single, razor-sharp feather embedded itself in the console next to Naruto's head, severing the datapad's connection. The broadcast was cut. Naruto and Kathleen turned to the window. Floating there, suspended in the night air by two magnificent scarlet wings, was the number 2 hero, Hawks. His expression, visible behind his visor, was a complex mixture of shock and grim resolution. "You have no idea what you've just done." Hawks's voice, amplified by his mask, was tight. "You've just declared war on every government on Earth." "No," Kathleen shot back, stepping forward, her body aglow with power. "We've just told the people the war is already here." Hawks drew two long, gleaming feathers that solidified into flexible blades. "My orders are to bring you in. Both of you." The fight was instantaneous. Hawks shot through the reinforced glass of the spire, a crimson comet of feathers and steel. Naruto met him head-on. He didn't fly. He used a kinetic quirk to push off the floor with explosive force, meeting Hawks in the air. He activated a barrier of hardened air to block the initial sword strike, the impact ringing like a bell. It was a battle of speed versus versatility. Hawks was a whirlwind of motion, his feathers detonation to become a storm of razor-sharp projectiles, each one controlled with pinpoint precision. Naruto was a reactive enigma, pulling a different counter from his arsenal for every attack. He used a magnetism quirk to throw the trajectory of the feathers off, a localized gust of wind to create a vortex of turbulence around Hawks, and tendrils of solid shadow to try and ensnare his wings. Below them, Kathleen smashed her way out of the tower. She didn't fly. She simply decreed, "The air beneath my feet is now a solid platform," and charged up a staircase of her own creation to join the fight. She was the heavy artillery, her every move forcing Hawks to disengage from Naruto and focus on her overwhelming power. They were holding him. They were actually holding their own against the fastest man in Japan. Then it happened. On the blank screens of the city below, a new message flashed, overriding every channel. It wasn't from Naruto. It was a global alert from the Unified Space Command Network. Global Communications Network anomaly detected. Geosynchronous orbit. Source unknown. All three of them, Naruto, Kathleen, and Hawks, froze in midair. They looked up, past the clouds, into the star-dusted blackness of space. A single, impossibly thin beam of silver light descended from the heavens. It moved with an unhurried, deliberate pace. It touched the U.S. Governor SAT-7, the primary communication and surveillance satellite for the entire Pacific Rim. There was no sound, no explosion, just a silent, brilliant, white flash. And then, nothing. The satellite was gone, vanished, erased from existence. The message was brutally, undeniably clear. The Otsutsuki had been watching, and they had just confirmed Naruto's every word. The sight broke the spell. Hawks stared into the sky, his wings faltering for a split second, the sheer, world-ending implication of what he had just witnessed crashing down on him. It was the only opening Naruto needed. He grabbed Kathleen's arm. Time to go. He activated his spatial warp, and reality twisted around them. They vanished from the sky above Tokyo, leaving a stunned and horrified Hawks floating alone in the sudden, terrifying silence. The world below was just beginning to scream. The war had been declared, and the enemy had just answered. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Gathering of Power. The world did not fall into chaos. It shattered. The Brody Sea Ast was a hammer blow to the fragile glass of global order, and the satellite's silent annihilation was the proof that the hammer was real. In the days that followed, society fractured along 1,000 new fault lines. Governments scrambled to issue denials, then partial confirmations, their authority bleeding out with every contradictory press conference. Hero agencies imploded as their members quit, some in protest, some in terror. Some simply walking away from a job that had suddenly changed from public service to planetary defense. The stock markets plunged into a freefall powered by the single, terrifying certainty that the sky was no longer safe. In the midst of this global implosion, Naruto and Kathleen found their new sanctuary. It was a decommissioned submarine pen, carved into the side of a remote, windswept island in the Sea of Japan. A concrete behemoth, built for a war that had never come, now repurposed for one that had. It was Spartan, cold, and utterly invisible. Inside the cavernous main bay, a makeshift command center hummed with stolen life. Banks of servers, cannibalized from the HPSC strike team, were wired into a satellite uplink Naruto had, persuaded, to re-route its signal through a dozen shell corporations. Screens displayed a torrent of information. Panicked news reports, encrypted military chatter, seismic activity, and the ever-present star chart, red icon of the Otsutsuki fleet, a drop of blood creeping ever closer. They were the eye of a hurricane they had created. The European Federation has officially branded as global terrorists, Kathleen noted, her voice flat. She was looking at a newsfeed, her expression one of weary disgust. The American president is invoking the Hero Mobilization Act, effectively martial law. They're not preparing for an invasion. They're preparing to silence dissent. They're afraid, Naruto said, not looking up from a complex energy schematic he was studying on his own monitor. Fear makes leaders stupid. They're trying to put the genie back in the bottle, but they don't realize the bottle is already broken. He was right. Their broadcast had unleashed more than just the truth, it had unleashed a choice. Every person on the planet now had to decide what they believed. And in that fertile ground of doubt and fear, Naruto and Kathleen began to plant their seeds. They weren't looking for an army. They were looking for scalpels. Their first meeting took place in the rain-soaked, neon-drenched belly of Osaka's Dotonbori district. Their target was a man named Kato Tanaka, known in the hero world as Waypoint. His quirk was unspectacular in a fight, but strategically priceless. He could create a pair of linked portals, allowing for instantaneous travel between any 2 points he could clearly visualize. He had retired from the hero business 5 years ago after a disastrous mission had left him disillusioned with the HPSC's bureaucracy. They found him running a tiny, hole-in-the-wall takoyaki stand, its warm, savory smell a small pocket of comfort in the anxious city. He was a thin man with tired eyes who moved with the quiet resignation of someone who had seen too much. "We're not here to fight," Kathleen said, stepping out of the shadows of a nearby alley. She was dressed in simple civilian clothes, but her aura of power was an unshakable mantle. Kato didn't even flinch. He Saint expertly flipped the balls of octopus batter in their cast-iron molds. "I'm retired, and even if I wasn't, I'm not crazy enough to try and take on Star and Stripe." His eyes flicked to Naruto, who leaned against the alley wall. "Or the ghost who started a world war. We're not offering a job," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the noise of the city. "We're offering a chance. You watched the broadcast. You saw the satellite. You know what's coming. I know that the world is tearing itself apart," Kato countered, his voice laced with bitterness. "And you two lit the match. I've had an hour of fighting wars for people in high castles. This isn't their war anymore. It's ours," Kathleen insisted, her voice resonating with a conviction that was impossible to ignore. "The HPSC, the governments, they failed. They're just trying to hold onto the railings of a sinking ship. We're building the lifeboat." Naruto pushed off the wall and walked forward, placing a simple, unredacted data chip on the counter. "This is the full, unedited Izanagi file, everything the HPSC did, everything they hid. We're not asking you to trust us. We're asking you to trust the truth." Kato looked from the chip to their faces. He saw no deception, no coercion. Just the hard, grim certainty of two soldiers standing on the edge of an abyss. He sighed, a long, slow exhalation of a man who knew his quiet life was over. He picked up the data chip. "The portals take a lot out of me," he said, his voice gruff. "And my range is limited to the Japanese archipelago. For now," Naruto said. "We can work on the rest." Waypoint was the first. Others followed. A disgraced intelligence hero from South Korea known as Oracle, whose quirk allowed her to see probable futures based on available data, a chaotic Power that had been deemed too unreliable by her superiors. A Russian strongman villain calling himself the Bear, who could transform into a colossal beast of fur and rage, and who decided he'd rather fight for a planet he could live on than one he couldn't. A team of German twin vigilantes, Blitz and Krieg, who could manipulate electricity and metal, respectively, and who had been waging their private war against corporate corruption for years. They weren't heroes. They weren't villains. They were the ones who had fallen through the cracks of the old world, and they were the only ones with the skills and the mindset to build the new one. They gathered in the submarine pen, a strange and potent collection of power and pragmatism, the first soldiers of the Terran resistance. One night, long after the others had retired to their makeshift quarters, Kathleen found Naruto alone in the command center. He was staring at the star chart, at the relentless, patient advance of the red icon. The weight of their new reality seemed to be pressing down on him. 76 days, she said softly, coming to stand beside him. The faint light from the monitors illuminated the exhaustion on his face. "It's not enough time," he said, his voice rough. "We're a handful of outcasts against an empire that eats solar systems for breakfast." "We're more than that," she countered, her voice firm. She placed a hand on his shoulder. A simple gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes. "We're the truth, and you are the one who saw it first." He looked at her, at the unwavering strength in her eyes. In her, he didn't just see an ally or a commander. He saw an anchor, the only thing in this chaotic new universe that felt real and solid. The loneliness he had carried for so long, the crushing weight of his secrets and his power, felt lighter. "When this is over," he began, then stopped. He didn't know how to finish the sentence. He couldn't picture a world where this was over. She understood. "When this is over," she said, her voice a quiet promise, "we'll build something better. Together." It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact. A new rule, laid upon the world not by her quirk, but by their shared will. It was more powerful than any weapon. Their moment was shattered by Oracle's panicked voice over the intercom. "Naruto, Kathleen, to the command center, now. I'm seeing something." They rushed to her console. Oracle, a young woman with perpetually wide, haunted eyes, was trembling. Her quirk was showing her a cascade of terrible futures, all branching from a single, imminent event. "There's an energy surge," she stammered, pointing to a map of the Pacific Ocean. "Massive. Not the fleet. It's a single entity. It's descending, fast. It's not targeting a city. It's heading for the Japan Trench." Naruto's blood ran cold. The Japan Trench. One of the deepest points on the planet, a place of immense geological pressure and geothermal energy. "They're not attacking us," he said, a horrifying realization dawning on him. "They're feeding." The attack came with the subtlety of an earthquake. A creature, vast and terrifying, plunged from orbit into the ocean. It was not a ship. It was a living thing, a nightmarish fusion of crustacean and cephalopod, its colossal body covered in a shimmering, chakra-repellent carapace. The HPSC in the worlds. Militaries registered it as a meteor and breathed a sigh of relief when it landed harmlessly in the sea. They were wrong. Down in the abyssal dark, it latched onto a geothermal vent, a direct tap into the planet's lifeblood. It began to drink, siphoning raw thermal and geological energy, and its own power signature began to grow exponentially. "It's a vanguard," Naruto said, his face grim as he watched the data stream in. "A living factory. It's absorbing planetary energy to gestate something. Soldiers, weapons, we have to stop it before it finishes." "How do we fight a monster at the bottom of the ocean?" The bear growled from behind them. "We don't," Naruto said, his eyes already alight with a manic, strategic fire. "We make it come to us." He turned to Waypoint. "Kato, how close can you get a portal to a moving underwater target that you can only see on a sonar screen?" The old hero paled. "That's not visualization. That's a death wish." "Then I'll make it easy for you," Naruto said. He looked at Kathleen. "I'm going to piss it off. When it surfaces, I need you to hit it with everything you have. The rest of you, prepare for the fight of your lives." He walked to the edge of the open submarine bay. The stormy sea churning below. He closed his eyes and reached for Tremor's quirk. But he didn't just use it. He combined it with two others. a quirk that could convert kinetic energy into pure sonic waves. And another that amplified energy signatures. He slammed his foot down, sending a focused, amplified, and unbelievably loud seismic sonic pulse straight down into the Earth's crust. Aimed directly at the creature in the trench. It was the geological equivalent of screaming directly into its ear. Miles away and leagues deep, the creature roared in fury. The sea above it began to boil. It released its hold on the geothermal vent and shot towards the surface like a torpedo from hell. "It's coming," Oracle shouted. A massive, churning vortex formed on the ocean's surface a few miles from the island. Then, the creature emerged. It was larger than a battleship, a living mountain of glistening carapace and writhing tentacles, its many eyes glowing with malevolent, alien intelligence. It let out a shriek that was a physical wave of force, shattering windows in their command center. "Kathleen!" Naruto roared. She was already in the air, a glowing speck against the dark, stormy sky. She raised her hands, her face a mask of absolute concentration. "New order," she commanded, her voice the sound of reality bending to her will. "The concept of durability no longer applies to the creature below me." For a split second, nothing happened. Then, the creature's shimmering, indestructible carapace began to flake away like dried mud. It looked down at its own body in confusion as its divine Otsutsuki engineered defense simply ceased to exist. Now, Waypoint opened a portal directly in front of their command center. The bear, already in his colossal beast form, charged through it. Followed by Blitz and Krieg, crackling with righteous fury. The portal closed behind them and reopened 100 feet above the monster's head. They fell upon the creature, a surprise attack from a direction it couldn't have anticipated. The bear's claws, which would have scraped uselessly against its armor moments before, now tore deep gashes in its exposed flesh. Blitz and Krieg unleashed a combined storm of lightning and razor-sharp shrapnel, shredding its tentacles. The creature thrashed in pain and rage, its massive limbs creating tidal waves that crashed against their island base. It was wounded, but far from dead. It opened its vast maw, and a sphere of blindingly white, superheated energy began to form within it. "It's going to vaporize the island," Oracle screamed. Before it could fire, Naruto was there. He had Waypoint open a portal for a single, insane second, dropping him directly onto the creature's head. He slapped his palms down on its alien flesh. He didn't try to take its power. He knew he couldn't contain it. He did the opposite. He used all for one in reverse, a technique he had never dared to try before. He forced a dozen of his most chaotic, unstable quirks, a corrosive acid generation, a cellular decay ability, an uncontrolled bio-fission quirk, into the creature. It was like injecting poison directly into its brain. The creature shrieked, a sound of pure agony. Its own energy attack imploding in its throat. Its body began to convulse, breaking down from the inside out, a victim of Naruto's gift of cancerous, conflicting powers. With a final, world-shaking tremor, the great beast went still, then slowly began to list to one side, its colossal corpse sinking back into the depths from which it came. They had done it. They had won. Their small, fractured team of outcasts had faced a celestial vanguard and had thrown it back into the abyss. They stood on the shore of their island base, battered, exhausted, but alive. They looked at the churning, empty sea. Then back at each other. They were no longer just a collection of individuals. They were a team. Forged in the fires of an impossible battle, they were Earth's last, best, and only hope. The first skirmish was over, but as Naruto looked at the star chart in his mind's eye, he knew the war was just beginning. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The First Harvest. The quiet was the worst part. For 10 days after the Vanguard's defeat, the world held its breath. The silence from the stars was not peaceful, it was the still, cold air before a tsunami. On their island, Naruto's fledgling resistance trained with a grim, desperate intensity. Blitz and Krieg practiced combined electrical and metallic assaults, their powers weaving together into a storm of shrapnel and lightning. The bear worked with Waypoint, perfecting a terrifying tactic they dubbed the Bear Bomb, portaling the giant, raging beast directly into enemy formations. Oracle sat in the command center, her eyes unfocused, sifting through the chaotic timelines of the future, her every flinch sending a ripple of anxiety through the base. Kathleen and Naruto stood on the cliffside, the sea wind whipping at their clothes. They were watching the sky. As they always did, their shared moments of quiet had become a strange, unspoken ritual, a silent acknowledgement of the storm they had pulled down upon the world. And the fragile solace they found only in each other's presence. "She's seeing something," Kathleen said, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Oracle, she won't say what, but she's been staring at London on the world map for 3 days." "I know," Naruto replied, his voice a low rumble. "She sees a great silence. A city with no voice." He felt a familiar, cold dread. It was the same feeling he'd had on the battlefields of his old world, just before a terrible jutsu was unleashed. The feeling of a rule about to be broken. A life about to be unwritten. "She also said something else," Kathleen added, turning to face him. Her eyes were serious, searching his. "She said your power is a key. Not just a weapon. That it was meant for this." Before he could process her words, a klaxon, shrill and deafening, blared from the command center. They sprinted back inside, their brief moment of peace shattered. Every screen in the room was red. Oracle was on her feet, her face ashen, pointing a trembling finger at the main display. It showed a satellite image of Western Europe. "It's happening," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Not one, not a ship, all at once. Over London, over the ancient, sprawling city, reality tore open. 12 perfect, circular gateways of swirling black energy materialized in the sky, arranged in a precise, geometric pattern. There was no sound, no shockwave. Just a silent, surgical incision into the world. From these gates, colossal white structures descended. They were not ships. They looked like grotesque, biomechanical seed pods, covered in the same pale, carved material as the vanguard beast. They plunged into the city, burrowing deep into the earth in Canary Wharf, at the base of the Shard, in Hyde Park. Then the roots came. From the base of these spires, a network of thick, white, pulsating tendrils spread through the ground with terrifying speed, erupting onto the streets. They moved like living things, smashing through buildings, tearing up roads. The world's remaining hero forces and the British military responded with everything they had. Jets streaked across the sky, launching missiles that exploded ineffectually against the white spires. Ground-level heroes threw everything they could at the roots. It was a massacre. The roots didn't fight back. They simply touched people. A person, hero or civilian, who was touched was instantly paralyzed. Their body would be covered in a thin, white film, their limbs locked in place, their face a mask of silent terror. Then, from the point of contact, smaller tendrils would sprout, burrowing into them, and a faint, shimmering light, their life force, their quirk, would be visibly siphoned away, flowing back along the root network to the central spires. The city wasn't being destroyed. It was being consumed. A great silence was falling over London as its people were turned into living batteries for a monstrous machine. "They're harvesting." Naruto's voice was a blade of ice. "Waypoint. Get us there. Now. Oracle. Find the primary spire. The nexus of the root system. We cut off the head. On it," Kato Tanaka said, his face grim. He closed his eyes, visualizing the chaos he was seeing on the screens. A shimmering, vertical oval of distorted air appeared in the center of the bay. Through it, they could see the burning, silent streets of London. "The Bear, Blitz, Krieg, you're the vanguard. Clear a landing zone," Kathleen commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "Waypoint, Oracle, you stay here. Keep the portal stable and guide us. Naruto and I will take the head." The bear roared and charged through the portal, a mountain of fury. Blitz and Krieg were right behind him. The sounds of a new, desperate battle echoed back through the shimmering gateway. "Naruto Gr. Obed Kathleen's arm just before she stepped through. "Their goal isn't to kill us. It's to capture, to absorb. Do not let those roots touch you. At any cost." She gave him a sharp, determined nod. "Let's go to work." They stepped through the portal into hell. The air was thick with dust and the smell of ozone. The silence was the most unnerving part. There were no screams. The only sounds were explosions from the dwindling military response and the relentless, grinding, slithering noise of the roots. The bear was a whirlwind of destruction, tearing entire root clusters from the ground. Eel Blitz and Krieg rained lightning and metal down on the Otsutsuki drones, pale, humanoid figures with blank, mask-like faces that were now emerging from the spires. The primary spire is in the center of the financial district. Oracle's voice crackled through their comms. 3 miles northeast of your position. It's a monster. They began to move, a blur of coordinated power through the ravaged streets. Kathleen created solid air steps to leap over obstacles, her fists punching entire buildings out of their path. Naruto used a combination of spatial warps and raw speed, a dozen minor quirks active at once to map the terrain, sense the enemy, and clear the way. They were effective, but the sheer scale of the invasion was overwhelming. For every drone they destroyed, 3 more took its place. The roots were everywhere, an intelligent, hungry web that tried to corral them, to trap them. They were fighting their way through a ruined plaza when a drone, larger than the others and wielding a black chakra-absorbing spear, ambushed them from above. It moved with incredible speed, its spear aimed directly at Blitz. Lucas! Krieg screamed. Krieg, his twin, reacted instantly. He used his quirk, forming a wall of twisted steel from a nearby bus stop to intercept the blow. But the spear didn't break the wall. It phased through it, the black metal dissolving the physical matter. It was going to hit. Without a thought, Krieg threw himself in front of his brother. The spear plunged into his chest. There was a horrible, wet sound. The energy in the plaza seemed to die. Krieg gasped, a line of blood appearing on his lips. The drone's spear glowed as it began to absorb his life force. Blitz screamed in pure, animalistic rage and unleashed a torrent of lightning that vaporized the drone, but it was too late. Krieg collapsed, the black spear dissolving into nothing as its master died. Blitz caught him, lowering him gently to the ground. The wound was fatal, a gaping, smoking hole in his chest. No, no, Bruder. No, Blitz sobbed, pressing his hands to the wound, but there was nothing to stop. Naruto and Kathleen stood frozen, the horror of the moment a physical blow. Their first casualty, the first price of this war, paid in full. Krieg coughed, his breath rattling. He looked past his weeping brother, his eyes finding Naruto's. There was no fear in his gaze. Only a fierce, defiant fire. Don't let them take it, he rasped, his hand weakly gesturing to his own chest. My power, my soul, it's ours, not theirs. He looked at his twin. Lucas, live. Then his eyes fixed on Naruto again. His voice a desperate, final command. Take it, use it, win. The light began to fade from his eyes. Naruto was paralyzed. The hunger of all for one roared in his mind, sensing the powerful, fading quirk. A feast waiting to be claimed. But the memory of the broken lives in his head screamed in protest. He couldn't. This wasn't a villain. This was an ally, a hero. Kathleen watched him, her face pale, her heart hammering in her chest. She saw the war in his eyes, the conflict between the predator and the man. He's asking you, Naruto, she said, her voice impossibly soft. It's his choice. The roots were closing in. The drones were regrouping. They had seconds. Naruto looked at Krieg's dying face, at the desperate plea in his eyes. To refuse was to let the Otsutsuki harvest his soul. To accept was to commit an act of profound, intimate violation. With a choked sob, he knelt. He placed his hand on Krieg's forehead. I'm sorry, he whispered. He let the hunger take hold. He felt the familiar, sickening lurch as Krieg's quirk, his life's essence, the power of metal given will and form, flowed out of the dying man and into him. It was different this time. It wasn't the bitter taste of a villain's power. It was clean, strong, and filled with the fierce, protective love Krieg had for his brother. It was a gift, a legacy, a burden. Krieg gave one final, peaceful sigh, and was gone. The influx of a new, powerful quirk, combined with the overwhelming ambient energy of the Otsutsuki harvest, acted like a key in a lock deep within Naruto's soul. His mind fractured. The world dissolved. He was no longer in London. He was in a place of pure white nothingness. Before him stood a woman. She was an Otsutsuki, with pale skin and small, horn-like protrusions, but her eyes were not the cold lavender of the clan. They were a warm, gentle brown, filled with an ancient sorrow. She wore the robes of a scholar, not a warrior. So, the seed has finally bloomed, Her voice was not a sound, but a thought. Impressed directly upon his consciousness. I am Setsuna, a scientist of the main family, in a life lived millennia ago. Who are you? Naruto thought back, his own consciousness feeling small and lost. I am your architect, the memory of Setsuna replied. I saw the endless, gluttonous cycle of my clan. I saw the billions of lives sacrificed for an evolution that led only to emptiness. I sought to break the cycle. I created a failsafe, a jutsu that could not be controlled by the clan, a weapon to fight a god. Images flooded Naruto's mind. He saw Setsuna in a secret laboratory, weaving complex seals of light. He saw her isolate a unique strain of the god tree's power, the very thing that created all for one in this world, and link it to a conceptual jutsu. I could not create a soul, Setsuna's memory explained, but I could anchor my creation to one. A soul of endless rebellion, of unbreakable will. The soul of Asura, my distant, foolish, hopeful ancestor. I tied my jutsu to his transmigrant cycle. I knew that one day, you, or a soul like you, would die a hero's death. My jutsu was designed to activate at that moment, to cast your soul across dimensions. To find a world with a compatible power, and to merge you with it. To turn you into the clan's own antibody. You did this to me. Naruto's voice was filled with a dawning, terrible awe. I gave you a chance to save more than one world, Naruto Uzumaki, Setsuna said, her form beginning to fade. You are not a collector. You are a crucible. You were not meant to steal power, but to inherit the will of those who fall. To carry their strength forward. You are the last hope of a ghost. Do not let my hope die with you. Her image dissolved. Naruto crashed back into his own body with a gasp. He was kneeling in the ruins of London, his hand still on Krieg's cold forehead. Only a second had passed. But he was no longer the same man. The curse of his power had been lifted, replaced by the crushing weight of purpose. He was a weapon. He was a failsafe. He was hope. He stood up. The grief for Krieg was a cold, hard stone in his chest, but it was now orbited by a burning, furious star of purpose. He could feel the new Quirk inside him, not as a foreign object, but as a part of himself. He felt Krieg's sorrow, his love for his brother. It wasn't a broken life. It was a legacy. He looked at Kathleen. She saw the change in his eyes immediately. The conflict was gone. In its place was a terrifying, absolute certainty. Get his brother out of here. Naruto's voice was low, but it commanded the authority of a king. Get everyone back to the portal. I'll finish this. Naruto, we fight together. Kathleen protested. No, he said, turning to face the direction of the main spire. You are the shield that protects humanity. But me. He held up a hand, and the metal from a dozen ruined cars lifted into the air, twisting and reforming into a swarm of razor-sharp spears. I'm the weapon that kills gods. He didn't wait for a reply. He shot forward, a blur of motion. He didn't just run. He controlled the metal in the rebar of the broken streets, pulling himself forward with impossible magnetic force. He was faster, stronger. He was using Krieg's quirk as if he'd been born with it. Kathleen watched him go, her heart torn between the need to follow and the wisdom of his command. She looked at Blitz, who was cradling his twin's body, his face a mask of catatonic grief. She made her choice. She would be the shield. Naruto arrived at the base of the primary spire. It was a monstrosity, a tower of living white flesh that pulsed with the stolen life force of a million souls. He could feel their silent screams against his mind. He raised his hands. Thank you, Krieg, he whispered. Then he unleashed hell. He pulled every ounce of metal from a 10-block radius. Cars, lamp posts, girders from skeletal skyscrapers, miles of subterranean pipes. A tidal wave of steel and iron rose into the air around him. A swirling vortex of urban debris. He combined it with Blitz's quirk, a memory gifted to him by Krieg's dying thoughts, and ran a current through the metal storm, turning it into a crackling, magnetized tempest. You came to harvest this world, Naruto roared, his voice drowned out by the storm he had created. But you forgot to ask for permission. He threw the storm at the spire. It wasn't a punch or a blast. It was a grinder. The supercharged metal tsunami tore into the Otsutsuki structure, shredding its biomechanical flesh, causing it to screech with a sound that was not of this earth. The stolen life energy bled out from its wounds, rising into the sky as a ghostly, shimmering aurora. He had given them a victory, but the city was lost. He stood alone in the ruins. A solitary figure wielding the power of a fallen friend, his face upturned to the sky, knowing this was only the first of many goodbyes. The war for Earth had truly begun, and its prick. E was already higher than he could have ever imagined. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The God Slayer's Gambit. The submarine pen had become a tomb. A heavy, somber silence had fallen over the base, a silenc. That no amount of strategic planning or frantic preparation could fill. It was the silence of a missing piece, a void in their small, fractured family. It was the silence of Krieg. Blitz, his twin, was a ghost haunting the command center. He sat by himself, meticulously cleaning a piece of metal, a bent and scorched fragment from his brother's uniform, over and over, his movements mechanical, his eyes empty. The lightning that once crackled at his fingertips was gone, replaced by a profound and static grief. Every member of their small resistance felt the loss like a physical weight, a stark brutal reminder of the price of their war. They had won the Battle of London, but it felt like a catastrophic defeat. They had saved the city from being fully harvested, but millions were left in a strange, soulless coma. Their life force drained. The world hailed the mysterious new force as heroes, but on the island, there was no celebration. They knew the truth. They hadn't repelled an invasion. They had merely survived the appetizer. Naruto stood before the main tactical display, the star chart a cold, blue fire in his eyes. The red icon of the main fleet hadn't slowed. The destruction of the London spires had been a nuisance to them, nothing more. "We can't win this way," he said, his voice cutting through the gloom. Everyone looked up. "We can't keep fighting their roots. We can't keep putting out the fires they set. We are swatting at the tentacles of an octopus. It's time to go for the head." Kathleen stood beside him, her presence a solid, unwavering pillar of strength. "You have a plan. I have a gambit," he corrected, his expression a mask of grim determination. He zoomed in on the star chart, past the main fleet, to a single, larger icon that hovered in a stable geosynchronous orbit. Hidden in the Earth's shadow. The mothership. The command vessel. The place where the leader of this harvest sits on his throne and watches worlds die. The bear let out a low growl. "You're talking about taking the fight to them. In space. It's suicide." "No," Naruto countered, his eyes blazing with an almost manic intensity. "It's the only move they won't expect. They see us as ants, scurrying on the ground. They would never anticipate an attack on their god. Even if we could get there, what then?" Blitz spoke for the first time in days, his voice a raw, broken whisper. "What can a handful of us do against a being that commands a fleet like that?" Naruto looked at the grieving twin, his gaze softening with a shared pain. "We do what they did to your brother," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We cut out their heart." The plan was insane. Utterly, beautifully insane. Waypoint's portals were the key, but his range was a problem. He couldn't visualize a target he'd never seen. In the blackness of space, 250,000 miles away. "I can't open a door to a room I can't picture," Kato said, shaking his head. "Then we get you closer," Naruto shot back. "We do it in stages. A chain of portals. From here, to a platform in the upper atmosphere. And from there, to their front door." "What platform?" Kathleen asked, her strategic mind already turning the tumblers of the problem. "Everything that flies is watched." "Not everything," a new voice said. Every head in the room snapped towards the entrance of the bay. Leaning against the massive steel door, his crimson wings folded behind him, was Hawks. He looked ragged, his uniform singed, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by a deep, bone-deep weariness. "The HPSC is a ghost town," Hawks said, walking forward into the light. "Most of the leadership is in a bunker somewhere, trying to pretend they're still in control. The rest of us, we had to make a choice. Keep following the orders of ghosts. Or start fighting the monsters we can actually see." He stopped in front of Naruto and Kathleen. He looked at the screens, at their small, determined team. "I have a suborbital stealth jet. Top secret HPSC tech. It can get you to the edge of space, completely off the grid. It's your platform." The former rival, the hunter who had been sent to capture them, was offering them the key to their entire gambit. "Why?" Kathleen asked, her voice cautious. Because I was floating in the sky when they blew out that satellite, Hawks said, his gaze hard. And I realized you weren't declaring war on the world. You were just the first ones to realize the world was already at war. My wings are for protecting people, not protocols. Right now, you're the only ones with a plan that sounds crazy enough to actually work. The launch was a marvel of coordinated, desperate power. From a hidden cove on the far side of the island, Hawks's jet, a sleek, matte black triangle that seemed to drink the light, shot into the sky. Its engines making no sound. Inside, the infiltration team, Naruto, Kathleen, Hawks, the bear in his human form, and a silent, vengeful Blitz, were strapped into their seats. Climbing to altitude, Hawks's voice crackled over the comms from the cockpit. 100,000 feet. Waypoint, the sky is yours. Back on the island, Kato stood with Oracle, his eyes closed, his hands outstretched. I see you, Hawks. I have the platform. A portal shimmered into existence inside the jet's small cargo bay. Phase 1 complete, Kato breathed, sweat beading on his forehead. Oracle, find me a target. Oracle's eyes were milky white, her mind sifting through the quantum foam of possibility, her quirk pushed to its absolute limit. I see it, she whispered. A shadow in the sun's glare. A blind spot. A hangar bay, unguarded. They are arrogant. They don't believe anything from the surface can reach them. I see it too, Kato said, his voice strained. Locking on. In the jet, the portal in front of them swirled. The view of the island command center dissolving. For a terrifying second, there was only blackness, a star-dusted void. Then, the image resolved. They were looking into a vast, cavernous chamber of gleaming white, pulsating with faint, organic light. An alien hangar bay. Go, 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 Kathleen yelled. They charged through the portal. The moment they were through, it snapped shut behind them, severing their only connection to home. They were behind enemy lines. The air was thin, cold, and smelled of sterile energy. Gravity was lighter, disorienting. The entire structure felt alive. Blitz, bear, you have your orders, Naruto said, his voice a low command. The bear roared, his body exploding into its colossal beast form. Blitz let out a yell of pure, unadulterated rage, and a storm of lightning erupted from his body, arcing across the hangar and vaporizing a row of dormant drone fighters. They were the diversion, a force of raw, chaotic grief, unleash. Head on the enemy that had taken everything from them. They charged out of the hangar, their only objective to draw as much attention as possible. That leaves the three of us, Hawks said, his wings spreading wide. Time to go god hunting. Quote, they moved through the mothership like ghosts. The internal corridors were vast and eerily empty, all smooth white curves and pulsing veins of light. Hawks flew ahead, a silent scout, his feathers able to detect the faintest vibrations and energy signatures. Naruto used a combination of sensory quirks and Setsuna's inherited knowledge to navigate the alien architecture. While Kathleen was the ever-present guardian, ready to obliterate any threat that appeared. They found the throne room at the very core of the vessel. Two massive, carved doors slid open at their approach, as if they were expected. The room beyond was a cathedral of alien power. At its center, on a throne carved from a single, crystalline shard, sat the leader of the harvest. He was ancient, his skin a dry, paper white, his robes even more ornate than Yorinobu's. His lavender eyes, the same rippling pattern of the Rinnegan, regarded them not with anger, but with a deep, profound disappointment. Like a gardener finding insects in his prize orchids. This was Lord Kinshiki, a high-ranking member of the Otsutsuki main family. The vermin have found their way into the house, Kins. Hiki's voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates. You reek of defiance. It is an unpleasant odor. We're here to cancel your lease, Hawks quipped, though the bravado didn't quite mask the tension in his voice. You have caused me a great inconvenience, Kinshiki continued, his gaze falling on Naruto. My finest harvester pod, destroyed. My vanguard beast, slain. And you, the little parasite. You carry the signature of our power. Yet you wield it like a savage. It is an insult to our divinity. He rose from his throne. He didn't float. He simply stood, and his presence made the very air thicken. Made reality itself feel thin and fragile. The fight began without warning. He moved, not with speed, but by ceasing to be in one place and appearing in another. He was in front of Hawks, his hand outstretched. Hawks reacted instantly, his feathers forming a solid shield, but Kinshiki's hand went right through it, phasing through the physical matter. He grabbed the hero by the throat and slammed him into the far wall with enough force to crack the alien material. Kathleen attacked next, a blur of motion, her fist wreathed in the power of new order. The space around my fist is now a vacuum, devoid of all energy. She commanded, a blow designed to negate his absorption abilities. Kinshiki simply held up his palm. A swirling red portal opened, and her fist plunged into it, its force entirely negated. Sent somewhere else in space-time. He countered with a casual flick of his wrist, firing a black receiver rod that she barely managed to dodge. It was Naruto's turn. He came at the god from the side. A storm of metal shards, Krieg's legacy, orbiting him like a shield. He combined it with a dozen other quirks, creating illusions, firing concussive blasts, trying to overwhelm the Otsutsuki's senses. It was useless. Kinshiki moved with an ancient, unhurried grace, countering every attack with a casual display of power that defied physics. He was swatting at flies. Your powers are novel, he admitted, backhanding Naruto across the room. Like the frantic flailing of a drowning child. You do not understand what true power is. It is not collected. It is consumed. He held up his hand, and a sphere of crackling, condensed energy formed in his palm, the combined life force of 1,000 of the London victims. He was about to unleash it when Kathleen screamed, her voice a raw, absolute command. New order. But she wasn't targeting him. She was targeting his power. The energy of this world is now poison to the Otsutsuki clan. It was a gambit of impossible scale, a rule C. Hange aimed at the very biology of their enemy. Kinshiki faltered. The sphere of energy in his hand sputtered, the raw Terran life force he was about to wield suddenly turning corrosive, burning his palm. He looked at his hand. Then at Kathleen, a flicker of genuine shock in his ancient eyes. What have you done? I've changed the rules of the game, she spat back, her nose bleeding from the sheer strain of imposing such a fundamental concept. It was the opening, the one in a billion chance. Naruto saw it, and he knew what he had to do. This couldn't be won with raw power. It had to be won with will. He didn't attack. He reached inside himself, to the core of his new power, the crucible. He reached for Krieg's soul, for Blitz's rage, for the silent screams of the London victims, for the desperate hope of his team. For Kathleen's unwavering belief. He pulled all of it into himself. He then looked at Kinshiki's throne. It was made of a strange, black, crystalline metal, a symbol of his divine authority. Using Krieg's quirk, Naruto reached out and seized it. Not with his hands, but with his will. Kinshiki felt the shift, his eyes widening in disbelief as his own throne began to tremble. This power is not yours to command, worm. He roared, lunging at Naruto. He was too late. Naruto let out a primal yell, a fusion of his own voice and the echoes of a dozen others. The throne shattered, not into pieces, but into a million razor-sharp, impossibly thin needles of black crystal. You came to our world to sit on a throne and judge us, Naruto roared, his voice resonating with inherited power. So die by it. The storm of black needles shot forward, not as a simple projectile attack, but as an inescapable web of judgment. Guided by Krieg's precision and fueled by Naruto's will, they did not shred Kinshiki's body. They pierced him at 1,000 points, not cutting, but pinning him, anchoring him to the very air. He was suspended in the center of the room, a divine being. Crucified by the symbol of his own hubris. He stared at Naruto, his immortal arrogance finally cracking to reveal a sliver of fear. Naruto walked forward until he was face to face with the trapped god. He placed his hand on Kinshiki's chest. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said, his voice a low, final verdict. And I am this world's immune response. He didn't take the Otsutsuki's power. He didn't want it. He simply activated a simple quirk he'd taken from a demolition worker long ago, molecular vibration. He sent a single, resonant frequency into Kinshiki's body, amplified by the crystalline needles. The great Lord Kinshiki, devourer of worlds, did not explode. He simply disintegrated. He turned to dust, a silent, final testament to a power he had never understood. A klaxon began to blare throughout the ship. A self-destruct sequence. "I think that's our cue," Hawks yelled, helping a swaying Kathleen to her feet. Naruto grabbed them both. He focused, his mind reaching out across the void of space, to the tiny, distant point of Kato Tanaka's consciousness. It was a connection forged not by power, but by trust. "Now," he yelled, not with his voice, but with his mind. Po. RTAL tore open in the crumbling throne room. They leapt through it, tumbling back into the cargo bay of the stealth jet as a series of silent, violent explosions began to tear the mothership apart behind them. They had done it. They had flown into the heart of the beast, faced its god, and torn him from his throne. They had won an impossible victory. But as they flew away from the brilliant, dying star of the mothership, they all knew this wasn't the end. They had killed a king. But the rest of the fleet was still coming. Chapter 9 End.